Choose either take care of my parents or get a divorce. I'm giving you the option. Standing in front of our new house, my husband James spoke with a smug look on his face. He acted as if he had bought this huge mansion himself, but in reality, I was the one who purchased this land and house. He has an inflated sense of self-worth, and telling me, if you don't want to divorce me, buy the house and take care of my parents. It's an unbelievable statement, but he genuinely thinks he's worth that much. The fact that no one is standing by him now should be the answer, but he doesn't seem to grasp that. What? Care for your parents, but they don't even live with us. What? What are you talking about? He hadn't yet realized that even his parents were distancing themselves from him. I'm Madison, a 45-year-old manager at a consulting firm, and I don't have any children. I joined my current company about 6 years ago through a career change. After graduating from college, I worked as a public servant in my hometown for about 2 years, but I became fed up with the lack of fulfillment and decided to change jobs. After gaining experience at a multinational company, I eventually landed at my current company through a connection with an acquaintance. Once remote work became an option, I no longer had to deal with long commutes, making it easier to balance work and home life. My current workplace is the polar opposite of my time as a public servant. I'm encouraged to win more work, and as I've risen in position, I can now choose my own project members. There are no pointless meetings either. Of course, there's pressure to deliver results, and performance reviews are strictly tied to numbers, but achieving results leads directly to salary increases. Everyone has their own views on work, but I wanted an environment where I could earn in line with my skills and effort, so this company suits me perfectly. In the 6 years since I joined, I've been promoted, and now, as a manager, I focus on recruiting talented individuals and building a top-performing team that continues to drive success. As a result, my income surpasses James's, but I've never told him exactly how much I earn. I first met James on social media. There was an offline meetup for people from our hometown, and that's where we met in person, which sparked our relationship. Looking back, he is the type who seems charming on the surface but reveals his true colors later on. When we exchanged contact information, people who knew James warned me about him. Now I understand why, but at the time, I thought he was a kind person who listened to me. He works at City Hall in our hometown, and he's a year younger than me. He went to college locally and, aside from traveling, has never lived outside our state. At first, I thought he simply loved our hometown, but as our relationship grew, I realized he had quite the inferiority complex about downtown. Having actually worked downtown, I can say there's definitely a sense of speed and being at the cutting edge of trends. The number of people, shops, and the heavy traffic were overwhelming at first. However, just because downtown is fast-paced doesn't mean it's superior, and when I'm exhausted, I find myself longing to return home to the quieter pace of life in my hometown. That's why, as soon as remote work became an option, I moved out of my downtown apartment and returned to my hometown. Living downtown all the time can be draining. In the end, I think both places have their pros and cons. I like both, but outside of work, I prefer to spend my time quietly in my hometown. That's all it was. But he often made snide comments about my career, as if it bothered him. If you look at his life path, excelling in school, attending the most prestigious local university, and then securing a job at the local city hall, it's a career that would be praised by relatives who have lived in the same place their whole lives as a way of giving back to the community. In fact, his parents, William and Isabella, were probably relieved when he chose to stay close to their home. His sister, Natalie, had moved away early on and was raising her children in a distant place, which likely made them even happier to have James nearby. They might have imagined that eventually James would marry, have kids, and take care of them in their old age, becoming the envy of others around them. It's no surprise that they both had pampered James ensuring he wouldn't slip away like Natalie had. But the thing about marriage is that it involves someone else. He may have been sweet to his girlfriends, but once a relationship grew serious enough for him to introduce them to his parents, they would bolt. Apparently, this had happened to James multiple times. I was unaware of this phase of his life, as I had briefly left our hometown after quitting my public servant job, so I learned about these rumors a little too late. After we got married, he began making more and more comments that belittled others. His work at City Hall seemed relatively unchallenging, giving him plenty of time to notice everyone's flaws. He frequently shared complaints about the residents who came to the office, as well as his colleagues and superiors. I get it, there's rarely a workplace where everyone gets along perfectly, and it's only natural to have frustrations. But honestly, the fact that he could criticize every single person so thoroughly seemed to me like a sign that he had too much free time on his hands. Sure, there are people I find difficult, too, but I don't have time to dwell on them. Complaining doesn't pay the bills. I know that makes it sound like I'm obsessed with money, but it's true, life is better when you spend less time on gossip and complaints. What was really unsettling was that when we visited my in-laws' house, James would go on and on about how incompetent everyone around him was and how much better he was by comparison. William sighed several times during these conversations, so he must have been sick of it. Isabella, on the other hand, was doing her best to listen attentively, clearly trying not to upset James. With Natalie gone and not bringing her children around, Isabella might have been desperate to keep James from slipping away as well. When we first got married, I was working at a multinational company and commuting nearly 2 hours each way. The work I had been doing before that just didn't fulfill me. So even though the commute was tough, I preferred having a job that gave me a sense of accomplishment. I was the only one struggling with the long commute, my transportation costs were fully covered, and I was making more money. So there was no downside for James, but I still remember him criticizing me. Is this because you've got an inferiority complex about the countryside? Are you that desperate to work downtown? People are going to laugh at you. It had nothing to do with the countryside or downtown. I was simply searching for meaningful work. Naturally, though, job opportunities in the countryside are limited, which meant I had to head downtown for better prospects. But James just couldn't understand that. Even then, I thought I wouldn't be criticized as long as I kept up with the housework, so I made the effort, cutting into my sleep to get everything done. It was my own way of rebelling against him. However, after a certain incident, his behavior became even more irrational. It happened after he attended a dinner gathering with friends. Since James and I went to different schools, we didn't attend the same gatherings, but my childhood friend Charlotte went to the same high school as James, and she told me what happened. According to her, everyone was tired of James boasting about himself, and no one was interested. His life path, which earned him praise from William, Isabella, and his relatives, didn't impress his friends. Among them were people who had attended prestigious universities, worked at large companies, or even started their own businesses and become CEOs. In that crowd, his career seemed utterly ordinary and dull in their eyes. Apparently, he wasn't happy about that. When he realized no one cared about his achievements, he began boasting about my job instead. And not only that, but he reportedly said, "My wife may not be having kids anytime soon, and my parents don't think much of her, but compared to a stay-at-home wife who's basically like livestock, she's a lot better since she brings in money." Charlotte must have been really irritated, as she assured me that his exact words were, "There's no mistake in what he said." After James' comment, his friends were understandably upset, and of course, they would be. It was an offensive statement, showing his sexist attitude toward women, and revealing how he viewed me more like a tool than a partner. I couldn't help but shudder at the thought if I had quit my job to raise children, would he have called me livestock too? He wasn't interested in connecting with people at that dinner. He just wanted to assert dominance. He wanted others to envy him and feel inferior, feeding his warped desire to boost his own self-esteem. But when he couldn't establish dominance, he would turn to using me as a prop or put others down to elevate his position. It became obvious why he had stopped being invited to these gatherings. He wasn't genuinely proud of me either. He wanted to say, "Look at me, the kind of man who can attract a woman like that." At one of these gatherings, someone finally grew tired of James' attitude and reportedly said, "Aren't things awkward when your wife earns more than you?" That person likely wasn't making a sexist remark about women earning money. It was more of a sarcastic jab at James, who was always bragging. Instead of feeling proud of having a high-earning wife, James was ridiculed, and after that day, he developed a strong sense of rivalry toward me and started making even more condescending remarks. That's what led to his comments about my 2-hour commute. There was a time when both William and Isabella, as well as James, pressured me about having children, looking down on me in the process. Regardless of the real reason, I'm sure William and Isabella genuinely wanted grandchildren, but I don't think James actually wanted kids. Someone as self-centered as James, who needed constant pampering, could hardly be expected to prioritize a child over himself. And though he never told William and Isabella, James once tried to change jobs. "My education is fine, so it should be easy to get hired. All that's left is choosing where to go." I still remember that naive fantasy of his vividly. In reality, he didn't pass a document screening for any company. The reason was simple. His education history showed he'd never left his hometown, and his work experience and qualifications revealed he had no useful skills. The days when a degree alone could open doors were long gone, and I knew that finding a new job as a former civil servant was difficult. The main reason is that, despite having high self-esteem, people like James, with no experience in the private sector, are often seen as difficult to hire. Companies looking for mid-career hires prioritize people who can immediately contribute, so concrete accomplishments and skills are absolute selling points. He had no doubt that just by sending out his resume, he'd quickly be called in for interviews. But when no one contacted him, he was furious. If James had taken that opportunity to reflect on his narrow outlook and reconsider his way of life, the future might have turned out differently, but I doubt any advice would have helped him at that point. And when I successfully transitioned from my job at a foreign company to my current position at a consulting firm, James became more determined to assert his superiority. He was desperate to make himself feel better, saying things like, "Women have it easy. They don't even need to be that competent to get hired, right?" At that point, his comments were on par with the conspiracy theories and delusions you'd see on social media. In reality, I had been quietly working on improving my language skills and earning a tax accountant qualification, but I didn't feel the need to explain every little effort I was making. As for me, I would have been happier if my partner had just appreciated my hard work and relied on me more. Unfortunately, that wasn't the kind of relationship we had. The other day, during a visit to my in-laws' house on holiday, William, who had been quiet until then, started complaining about James. Since he was our only son, we ended up spoiling him. Honestly, I never thought he'd become so difficult to handle. After James entered high school, I couldn't physically overpower him anymore, and he knows that. So whenever something doesn't go his way, he yells or throws a tantrum. We just had to listen to whatever James wanted to protect ourselves. We were so desperate for him to get married and move out. I don't know what might have happened behind the scenes, but if his friends had started to dislike him, I'm sure word spread around the neighborhood. In this area, many of my friends' families run businesses or shops. No doubt William and Isabella had heard various rumors as well. Even they had grown weary of James. They used to pressure me about having grandchildren, but after a while, all they would say was, "Please don't get divorced. Take care of James." They wanted to push the burden onto me and distance themselves from James. William and Isabella, who once bragged about him when we first got married, had become completely subdued. Since I started working remotely, James began focusing his frustrations on that. How can you get any work done just sitting at home? Women have it easy, just playing around on the computer. In reality, I travel to meet important clients in person. And if necessary, I go on business trips. The rest of my meetings are simply done online. The projects my team handles generate significant revenue, and my salary has continued to rise. If I didn't want to hurt his fragile pride, I would have mentioned that I now earn about 4 times his salary, but I stay silent. After all, unlike him, I don't have time to waste gossiping. The responsibility is heavy when things don't go well. You dreamed of working downtown, changed jobs, and now you're stuck with remote work. No, I didn't fail. My company allows us the flexibility to work remotely or go to the office. It's just adapting to the needs of the world, I replied, even though I knew it was probably futile to argue. He wouldn't accept it. It's not much more than part-time wages, right? You've got it easy, just relying on your husband's salary while playing around at work. He still didn't hold back with his comments. James, don't think you can say whatever you want just because I've been silent. When have I ever relied on your salary? Remember who paid for the car? Who covered the overseas trips we took up until last year? And who was it that paid for building this new house? When I lightly pushed back, James hastily tried to cover it up. It's always the same pattern. I was just joking. I was only talking about the typical wife out there. Plus, you've got your mom's money, right? He didn't understand at all. On top of that, he seemed to believe that I was getting financial help from my mom. It's understandable since I hadn't explained my current income to him, but the fact that he can only maintain his self-esteem by putting others down feels almost like an illness. We're about to buy a new house, and I'm covering almost all the expenses. How can you still act like that? Come on, I wasn't bad-mouthing you, Madison. You're being paranoid, don't you think? If I had quit my job because of illness or to raise kids, I could have ended up as a housewife, couldn't I? Well, just make sure that doesn't happen. It feels almost impossible for someone like James, who's already in his 40s, to fix this warped way of thinking. The apartment we currently live in is getting quite old, so we're planning to buy a house soon. We had waited for a long time, wondering if we might have kids, but after turning 40, we decided it was time to move forward. James had been insisting on getting a house for a while now. If he were paying for it, he would have the right to voice his preferences. But James could barely contribute anything beyond moving expenses. Yet, he kept demanding an ideal property close to the station, convenient for shopping, in a quiet neighborhood, and near a hospital. Essentially, a luxury property that would cost over $1 million when you factor in both the land and the building. With an annual income of around $5K, James was aiming for beyond his means. And on top of that, he expected me to buy it without even expressing any gratitude. It was absurd. I was certain that once we moved in, he'd start bragging to people about living in an upscale neighborhood, even though he hadn't contributed a thing. One evening, I received a call from Charlotte. James crashed our friend's dinner party. He showed up uninvited. What? What do you mean? He somehow found out about it, even though we didn't tell him the time or place. How did he know? I had no idea either. The only thing I knew was that James had been quietly ostracized by his friends from school. Don't James even have any close friends? No, not at all. I'm sorry, Madison, but everyone genuinely hates him. You didn't know about the dinner, right? No, I had no idea. I didn't tell him anything. I know you wouldn't. But how did he find out? Everyone's really freaked out right now. We agreed not to invite him to dinners anymore, didn't we? Wasn't it because he alienated everyone at last year's gathering? Yay, exactly. That's why we planned this one in secret. I don't know what's going on either. Maybe you should just ask him to leave. We can't do that. Who knows what he might do? I didn't want to burden you with this, but James has been obsessively bothering one of our friends. She got divorced and is a single mom now. No way. What are you talking about? Tell me more. Charlotte's story went like this. There was a woman named Emily who had gotten divorced and was raising her child as a single mother. At a dinner a few years back, she confided in the group about her divorce, and James seemed to take an unusual interest in her story. He made repeated derogatory remarks about her being a single mother, a woman raising a kid on her own. You'd need some shady job just to make ends meet, right? Maybe you're doing something illegal. I wonder what'll happen to a kid raised with that kind of money. Of course, the rest of the group severely reprimanded him. Emily wasn't doing anything illegal. She was working 2 part-time jobs, at a supermarket and a cafe, to make things work. That's horrible. There's no excusing that. He never acted that way before we got married. If he had just said awful things, we could have cut ties and been done with it. But it got worse after that. What do you mean? He started stalking Emily. Stalking? What do you mean by that? He found out the address of her parents' house and went there to ask where she was living and what she was doing for work. And this was all after you two were married. Seriously? Yeah. I didn't want to stress you out with this awful story, so I hesitated to tell you. But I never imagined he'd keep stalking her for this long. Emily even moved twice because of her child's schooling. And yet, James supposedly ran into her near her new house and said hello like it was just a coincidence. People are starting to suspect that he's been using his position at City Hall to look up personal information. This was beyond anything I had imagined. He was apparently even worse than I thought. If the rumors were true, he could face disciplinary dismissal. If that happened, I'd have to support James with my income. Absolutely not. The reason I hadn't divorced him before wasn't because of love, but simply because there wasn't any pressing reason to. Even after realizing what a horrible person he was, we'd spent enough years together in the same home that I felt a slight attachment. But if he was getting involved in affairs or criminal behavior, that was a different story. For now, a few of the guys are taking James out somewhere else to get him away. Emily's not looking great, and the whole mood is terrible. We're thinking of starting the dinner over at another place. Charlotte wasn't the type to spread silly gossip or try to one-up me. Our parents were close, and we'd always been like sisters. If she was saying all this, there was no doubt that James had become a local pariah. I think he has gone too far. Emily's parents are planning to file a complaint with City Hall, not just because of the stalking behavior, but the fact that he's married and doing this in the first place is seriously bad. This isn't just cheating, it's stalking. I'm sorry he has been causing trouble. He said a lot of nasty things to me too, so I probably should have dealt with it more seriously. I'll have to apologize to everyone. You don't need to worry about that. Just make sure you're ready to protect yourself from this mess. A complaint is one thing, but if it escalates, they might go to the police. If that happens, Madison, you'll definitely get pulled into it too, and it'll be a nightmare. After I hung up with Charlotte, I immediately started searching for a private investigator experienced in infidelity cases. The first thing to look into was the stalking of the single mother and the suspicions about leaking personal information. It wasn't likely that City Hall would admit to any mistakes on their part, so it would be quicker to investigate whether James had stolen information on his own. It was impossible to uncover everything happening within City Hall, but considering how James had shown up at an unannounced dinner, I started to wonder if he had an accomplice. I had been planning for a budget of around $20K, but I was willing to spend more if necessary. For a long time, I've been enduring his harsh words. I had meaningful work and was so busy that I could ignore his behavior. But in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have. It caused trouble for many people. Though it's James' doing, as his wife, I have to deal with it and bring things to a proper resolution. Around midnight, he came home, smelling of alcohol. He'd probably been drinking at another place while getting a stern lecture and warning from some of his tough-looking friends. His expression made it clear that he hadn't been enjoying himself. As soon as he entered the house, He let out a strange yell and threw his leather shoes violently against the wall. Damn it. All of them are messing with me. In the quiet of the night, his voice echoed through the residential area. A nearby dog, sensing the commotion, started barking in alarm. Hey, keep it down. It's late, and you're disturbing the neighbors. Shut up, don't you dare tell me what to do, you lowlife. You can't just use words like lowlife as if it's normal. How would you feel if someone said that to you? You wouldn't stand for it, right? Don't casually throw around words that deny someone's worth. I spoke calmly, but it didn't seem to reach James, who was heavily drunk. What's wrong with calling a lowlife a lowlife? Those bastards grabbed me by the arm. That's what you get from uneducated people, they're all brute force. You barged into a dinner party you weren't even invited to and caused a scene. Even so, they stayed with you until this late, probably trying to talk sense into you. They lectured me all night. Me. I'll find out everything about their parents' companies. And if any of them are involved in public projects, I'll put pressure on them. Don't even joke about that. You work for City Hall, so that kind of talk isn't funny. I'm not joking. I can find personal information easily. Everyone who messed with me is going to regret it. At that point, James suddenly looked like he might get sick, so I quickly poured him a glass of cold water. After dragging him to the sofa and pulling off his socks, he soon started snoring loudly. It was filthy, but I'd make him shower in the morning. Once I was sure he was fully asleep, I turned off the voice recorder I had in my pocket. I had anticipated his outbursts, so I recorded everything just in case. For the next while, he remained in a foul mood. He was clearly bitter about being physically and verbally outmatched by the friends he had once looked down on. As a result, he continued to hurl insults at me, and I kept gathering sound recordings I could use later. As I compiled the recordings, I also reviewed the report I had received from the private investigator. The issue with Emily had already surfaced. Apparently, she had already contacted the police, reporting a suspicious individual in the area and requesting an increase in patrols. As a result, officers had been patrolling the neighborhood. It goes without saying that the suspicious individual was James. He had already been questioned by the police twice and had fiercely resisted when they requested that he accompany them voluntarily. There was a record of this with the police. In other words, he was now officially on their radar. At this point, it was clear that handling the situation quietly would be difficult. What I still don't understand is why James is so obsessed with Emily. Emily is 44, the same age as James. It feels a bit different from the typical situation of hitting on a younger woman. Plus, Charlotte testified that James had been looking down on Emily for becoming a single mother. Why would James be chasing after someone he despised? In the meantime, the completion of the new house was approaching. Designing the new place to my liking had become my biggest source of joy. I couldn't wait to relax in the new house, in a space that was perfectly soothing and just for me, where no one could disturb me. Finally, the house was finished, and we decided to go see it. Though James hadn't contributed a cent, he was more excited than anyone, talking about how he wanted to build a bar counter and have a room for playing mahjong. I didn't bother asking him, "Can you play mahjong by yourself? Why do you have so much stuff?" "We're just going to check the place today." "Right, I need it for some checks. You'll be looking at it later, too, so thanks in advance." All the materials weighing down my shoulders were about James. As I watched him imagining life in the new house, I must have been looking at him with the coldest eyes I'd ever had. "It's a nice house," he said. This house was one of the crowning achievements of all the hard work I'd done. The location and the building itself were perfect. The fact that I'd grown enough to own such property gave me confidence and courage. As I quietly soaked in the moment, James, as tactless as ever, said with a vulgar look on his face, "Take care of my parents, or we'll get a divorce. I'll let you choose. You're happy about that, aren't you?" He said this in front of the new house, as if he were the one who had bought it. There had never been any talk of caring for William and Isabella, and they were just over 70, hardly in need of care. Huh? What do you mean, care? You don't even live with your parents. What are you talking about? He looked at me with a slight expression of pity. If you tell Dad and Mom you'll take care of them, they'll happily move in with us. Imagine how great it'd be for a son to have a mansion, live with his parents, and have a wife who takes care of them. It sounded like the kind of thing that would make elderly people in our hometown envious. But that's what James was really after. He didn't care about them. He just wanted the reputation of being a good son. Even though he no longer had any allies around him, he was still desperately clinging to the idea of getting recognition for something that didn't even exist. I get that you have your own ideal, but this house is in my name, so it's mine. You're my wife, so anything you have is obviously mine too. It was a selfish attitude, and a phrase I'd heard somewhere before. You never even had kids, and just focused on your job like some useless woman. So gifting the house to Dad and Mom wouldn't be too much to ask, right? You've already failed as a woman. As usual, he continued his verbal abuse, and I quietly closed my eyes. It seemed my decision had been the right one. No matter what you claim, I'm the one who owns this house. And like I said before, you no longer have any parents to live with. Now, go inside. Our guests are waiting. I pushed his back, and we opened a pristine front door, almost untouched by fingerprints. In the living room, which was still unfurnished, sat William and Isabella. James, we've never heard anything about needing care. We don't intend to rely on you or Madison. We're planning to sell our current home and move into a senior living facility. Huh? What are you talking about? Out of nowhere. I built you this magnificent house. Be grateful. Go ahead, boast about me to everyone, just like you always have. I regret that we pushed our expectations on you too much. We spoiled you far too much. We thought we were being strict, but we were wrong. If you didn't do what we said, we'd scold you harshly. And if you did, we'd praise you and buy you whatever you wanted. That was a mistake. We're over 70 now, and we can't keep going along with you, James. You always ridiculed our hometown, so we thought you'd move out. We hoped that getting married might help you grow as a person. But we've heard every cruel thing you said to Madison. You haven't changed at all since school, always keeping yourself afloat by looking down on others. You secretly longed to be downtown, but didn't have the courage to leave. Instead, you blamed us, claiming that we held you back from a better life. That's how you've been keeping your pride intact. What the hell? Shut up, don't mess with me. If you just worked hard, that would have been enough for us. As long as you didn't hurt others or do anything wrong. What? I am working hard. What more do you want from me? We've received 2 calls from the police. What? We're pretty aware of what you've been up to. What are you talking about? I pulled out the documents and looked at James. The calls from the police were about you stalking Emily. They've documented everything, so you won't be able to sweep it under the rug. The second time they asked you to come with them voluntarily, it's recorded that you responded quite aggressively. What the hell? Why do you even know about her? Come on, we're just a year apart, and we grew up in the same town. You might not remember, but Charlotte has been my best friend since childhood. I began spreading out the reports I'd received from the detective. James, you've been living in this magnificent house, all thanks to Madison's salary. Like Madison could make that much money. She's been sitting around at home, pretending to work, basically half a pet. Her parents must have been giving her money. How could you say such a thing? So he still thought that way about me. Why don't you try looking up the name of my company? With a basic level of common sense, you'd probably have heard of it. But maybe that's asking too much from a public servant. What? What did you say? Private sector businesses probably seem far off to you, huh? Yelling won't help you here. Tough luck, right? It must be frustrating not being able to belittle me like you want to. That's a lie. There's no way you're making that much money. If that were a lie, I wouldn't have been able to buy this house or this land. And if I'd received $1 million from my parents, we'd have had to pay gift tax, wouldn't we? My finger stopped on one of the photos. It was of a man lurking near Emily's house, looking toward it from a hidden spot. Anyone would report this, even if it wasn't Emily. There are schools nearby, with children passing by in large numbers. What on earth are you doing? Why were you stalking her? Do you have a reason for that? It's Madison's fault for not being attractive enough as a woman. She graduated from a better university than me, got into a better company, and makes more money. She's arrogant. But Emily, she has no education, works part-time, and is a single mother. She's the bottom of the heap. She's beneath me, so I gave her attention. Isabella stood up silently and walked outside. She must have felt sick. It looked like she went out to get some fresh air. I didn't realize you were this much of a despicable person. Can you look at this photo too? There were multiple reports made to the police by school staff about a suspicious person in front of the school. The person who was seen as suspicious is this man. The man in the picture was wearing a hat pulled down low, looking down, but it was unmistakably James. You knew that Emily's daughter was in high school, didn't you? That's why you tried to intimidate her to get closer to both Emily and her daughter. It's not me. That photo is fake. And besides, if there are students in a picture, then it's a weekday, right? I'd be at work in City Hall at that time. We've already confirmed that you took the afternoon off on this day. And we also know how you found out the name of Emily's daughter's school. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do it. I don't know anything. You accessed personal information at City Hall, didn't you? I told you, I don't know. Where's your proof? Isabella, now feeling calmer, returned. And I explained how James had stolen personal information. I took out my smartphone and played the saved audio for everyone to hear. And this is you, calling the restaurant where the alumni from that school were going to have a meal, asking for details. The voice was unmistakably his. Then another man's voice came on. You know, I didn't think it'd turn into such a big deal the first time you called. I couldn't believe a City Hall employee would do something like that. So I helped you out. But now I realize this involves personal information, so I'll have to decline your request from here on. That was just supposed to be a surprise appearance. Nothing shady about it. It was a few bad friends who caused the trouble. Everyone was so happy when I showed up. Well, they did ask us to call the police. That's a misunderstanding. I work for City Hall, you know. I know all about your family and your personal information. That's a threat, you know. Are you sure you want to say something like that? Hiding things is what City Hall does best. This is your family's precious restaurant, right? You don't want to see it ruined, do you? So just do as I say. Tell the other restaurants too. And when the next alumni gathering is scheduled, let me know right away, okay? The recording ended there. Damn it. You bugged me. I'll report you to the police. You idiot. Enough already. William's roar echoed through the new house, threatening restaurant owners, stealing personal information to find Emily's daughter's school. That's serious crime. And City Hall's already been informed. The restaurant staff now fully understands what you've been up to. That's why they recorded this call. Everyone's useless. A bunch of worthless losers. James, half crying, shouted while William and Isabella looked at him coldly. No matter how much he insulted others, James was clearly the most pathetic person in the room. So, as I said, you'll need to atone for your crimes and apologize to everyone you've wronged. From here on, City Hall and the police will handle things. But to answer your original question, I'm choosing divorce. What? You've got to be joking. You show me this big fancy house, and then tell me I can't live here. You're giving me this house, and then we'll split, right? Don't be ridiculous. Didn't William and Isabella just say they're moving into a facility? This house is for me and Mom to live in. If we're getting divorced, there'll be a division of assets. No matter what the reason, you can't refuse to split the assets during a divorce. I don't have any savings, so I'll be getting half of Madison's. Get a grip. Do you even know what's coming for you? Are you seriously going to beg for money from the person you've been looking down on all this time? Aren't you embarrassed? Why wouldn't I take what I can get? That's just smart. True, you can't refuse a division of assets, but that let the guilty party walk away with an advantage, right? That's why there's something called compensation in divorce cases. I've been keeping records of all the verbal abuse and emotional distress you've caused. And once it comes to light that you've been accessing personal information illegally, you won't be able to keep your job. Think you'll still be able to find work here in this town? The restaurant owners, the police, and the school staff all know what you've been doing, and they've all agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. I've been keeping records of all the verbal abuse and emotional distress you've caused. And once it comes to light that you've been accessing personal information illegally, you won't be able to keep your job. Think you'll still be able to find work here in this town? The restaurant owners, the police, and the school staff all know what you've been doing, and they've all agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. James, give it up. You have no right to take the wealth that Madison has saved on her own. You're 44 years old, have no children, and yet you have no savings. That only proves how uncooperative you've been in this marriage. Do you really want to shame yourself further by discussing this in court, even if you're forced to pay compensation during the divorce proceedings? Do you still want money that badly? In the end, I was bluffing, gambling on this last statement. If James truly had no shame or pride, he would have ignored everything and demanded the money anyway. But I knew how James's pride worked. If I provoked him just a little, he'd get angry and give up on the conversation altogether. James finally fell silent, his words caught in his throat, and with that, the grand house officially became mine, and I invited my mom, who hadn't been her lively self since losing Dad, to come live with me. William and Isabella had started touring senior living facilities. It seemed they were exploring different options without being too fixated on staying local, enjoying some couple time along the way. Meanwhile, from what I heard from Charlotte, James's harassment of Emily's daughter infuriated Emily. Though Emily tends to be passive about things involving herself, it was a completely different story when it came to her daughter. She shared information about the suspicious behavior with the school staff and other parents, and consulted with the police. The biggest issue, though, was James's unauthorized access to personal information, which turned into a serious matter. News of his punishment and dismissal for gross misconduct was quietly reported in the local newspaper's social section. James, whose face and name had become too well known in the area, struggled to find even part-time work after that, and ended up relying on William and Isabella for support. Apparently, he said something noble like, "Let's all live happily together as a family. I'll take care of everything." But William and Isabella no longer trusted him. He's all talk and no action, as usual. Isabella, who once called James her pride and joy, had completely given up on him. Now, she found more joy in going out with William, which seemed like a positive change. As for me, I plan to keep working at my current income level for another 10 years if I can, so that I can handle both caring for my mom and planning for my own old age at my own pace. I've realized that I'm the type of person who can live alone. I figured this out at 45, but that's not such a bad thing, is it? That said, Mom seems a bit lonely when she has too much free time. So I've decided to adopt a stray cat sometime soon, hoping it'll become a cherished companion for her, in place of grandchildren.
It was the day of the big presentation. Hannah and I sat in the conference room, our heads in our hands, devastated by the sight before us. The carefully printed handouts we had prepared were now completely drenched in coffee, rendering them utterly useless.
"What are we going to do now?"
Hannah lamented, her voice tinged with despair. Despite our predicament, the presentation moderator relentlessly urged us to take the stage, disregarding our distress. To make matters worse, as our audience consisted of international companies, today's presentation was to be delivered in multiple foreign languages. The attendees were primarily from Europe, so we had planned to incorporate French and Italian throughout the presentation. Hannah and I had prepared the presentation materials in various languages. She was planning to give the explanation while referencing those documents, but without them, even she couldn't proceed with the presentation. Hannah tried to make her way to the podium, her face ashen, determined to somehow manage. I instinctively placed my hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Camila, who had likely orchestrated this situation, was underestimating me. She thought that without the materials, we would be rendered helpless. I would show her just how mistaken that notion was. My name is Glenda. I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've lived abroad. My dad had been assigned overseas for work. Every few years, we moved to different countries, immersed in diverse languages and cultures. There were times when I struggled to adapt to unfamiliar environments, but now, those experiences are cherished memories. I returned to the United States when I was 15. As I entered high school, Mom and I decided it was time to settle down in one place, so we came back to America together. Having grown up in foreign lands and exposed to multiple languages, I hoped to find a way to utilize my talents in the US. However, my aspirations were swiftly shattered. After the entrance ceremony, we gathered in the classroom for self-introductions. I confidently shared my experiences living abroad and my proficiency in various languages.
If you have any questions about foreign languages, feel free to ask me anything.
As I looked around, I finally noticed the odd expressions on everyone's faces. I later learned that my English accent was apparently a bit strange at the time. However, in the countries where I had lived before, no one minded if someone's language usage was slightly off. They were more interested in the content of the conversation than the person's manner of speaking. But in America, or at least among my high school classmates, it was different. They all laughed at my peculiar English. Whenever I spoke, they would snicker and whisper to each other. Eventually, they started calling me pushy and insensitive to social cues. No matter what I did, I was always the center of attention, ridiculed, or gossiped about. I constantly felt the cold stares of my classmates. Over time, I became convinced that everyone was mocking me no matter what I did, and I started silently staring down at the corner of the classroom. But then, someone appeared before me in that state. Her name was Hannah, a girl 1 year older. She was a member of the Foreign Language Club and had heard rumors about a third culture kid enrolling, so she sought me out. By that point, I had become terrified of drawing attention, so I tried to send Hannah away when she approached me, but she kept coming to see me. Perhaps she was curious about why I was so guarded despite her repeated attempts to talk to me. One time, she asked me the reason. I couldn't help but confess how my English and behavior were strange, causing me to feel isolated from the class. Upon hearing that, a beaming smile spread across her beautiful face. And then she said to me,
"That's not true at all. Your way of speaking and your actions are adorable. But if it bothers you that much, I'll teach you English, and in exchange, you can teach me foreign languages."
From that day on, until Hannah graduated, I met with her every day to talk about various things. She engaged with me sincerely, not out of pity. She patiently taught me the intricacies of English and helped me navigate cultural differences when I struggled. And she always,
"It's okay, you're speaking just fine. You're not doing anything weird. Be confident,"
encouraged me, saying. By the time Hannah graduated, thanks to her, I had regained my confidence. Time passed, and I was headhunted by a company for a mid-career position. The one who had recruited me was none other than her. With her exceptional abilities, Hannah had become the sales department manager, captivating those around her not only with her competence but also her natural beauty and outstanding leadership. Persuaded by her, who said,
"I need your help,"
I decided to join the company as well. Of course, I wanted to utilize my language talents and prove my worth in the international business arena, but more than anything, I wanted to repay her for supporting me during my difficult times. And so, I joined the company and was assigned to Hannah's department. In that department, there was also a section chief named Camila. It only took a brief exchange of words during my introduction to realize it. She was a self-centered person who looked down on others. And above all, she seemed to harbor an abnormal level of hostility towards Hannah. I felt a bit uneasy, but I focused on learning my job to quickly adapt to this new environment. At that time, I was not yet aware that this presence would begin to cast a dark shadow over my life. Half a year after joining the company, my days gradually lost motivation due to Camila's harassment.
Here, take care of this too. Well then, I'm heading out first.
Camila approached my desk, said those words, and placed a large stack of documents. Upon closer inspection, I realized they were already approved documents. She probably meant for me to file them away. It was sad that I had come to understand her intentions without being told during these past 6 months. I glanced at the clock. The hands indicated that there were about 10 minutes left until the end of working hours. It was a usual occurrence for her to deliberately bring a large amount of work at this hour and start preparing to leave even before the end of the workday. I suppressed the sigh that threatened to escape and started tackling the work that had been forced upon me. From the very day I joined the company, she kept pushing various tasks onto me. The volume increased day by day, and my overtime hours grew proportionately. Yet, she would say things like,
"Why are you always working so much overtime? You're slow at your job, aren't you? You're incompetent. You should learn from me, who always leaves on time, and put in some effort to go home earlier."
In the beginning, I strived to improve my work efficiency to leave earlier, as Camila suggested. However, the more I streamlined my tasks, the more work she would dump on me. Now, I overheard people in the department gossiping that she might not be doing any work other than approvals. Still, work is work, and I didn't want to stand out in a bad way by doing something wrong, like in high school, and be seen in a strange light. So, I had no choice but to complete the tasks she assigned to me. However, Camila refused to acknowledge my efforts and made me revise the reports and project proposals I had painstakingly completed multiple times, citing trivial mistakes. The workload kept increasing. Nevertheless, I managed to work until the last train, putting in my best effort to create a project proposal that I thought was perfect. Hannah, who was worried about me, came to check on me and reviewed the proposal, giving me her approval as well. Although sleep-deprived, I headed to work with a light step for the first time in a while. First thing in the morning, I submitted the project proposal I had created to Camila. She read through the proposal I had prepared. Eventually, her brow furrowed and her eyes narrowed in displeasure.
"What is this? This is useless, it's garbage."
Surprisingly, she spat those words out and tore up the project proposal I had made right then and there. She ripped it into tiny pieces in front of my eyes and tossed them into the air. My painstakingly crafted proposal, what used to be a proposal, fluttered like confetti. Tears welled up in my eyes at the sheer absurdity of it all. Seeing me trying my hardest not to cry, she laughed mockingly.
Yeah, you think crying will solve everything?
Don't get emotional, it's unsightly. This isn't preschool. As punishment, clean up this mess. Snorting, she dismissed me as if shooing away a dog. Unable to bear it, I fled the scene and rushed into the restroom. The tears I had been holding back spilled forth. Concerned colleagues came to check on me, but I couldn't leave the restroom. About 5 minutes later, perhaps informed by someone, even Hannah came to the restroom. "Are you okay? I know very well that you are capable. And you yourself know your own abilities best, don't you?" Hannah encouraged me through the door. Then, she said she would talk to Camila and left the restroom. About 5 minutes later, when I finally managed to stop crying and return to the office, the torn pieces of the project proposal had been neatly cleaned up. According to a colleague who came to check on me, Hannah had scolded Camila in front of everyone, saying that her treatment of her subordinate was too harsh. However, Hannah's kindness only served to fuel Camila's hostility towards me. Her harassment escalated further, knowing no bounds. That harassment gradually robbed me of my passion for work. Even so, I endured day after day, striving to meet her expectations. Then one day, a shocking incident occurred. The documents for an important project that Hannah and I were in charge of had disappeared. The documents were the ones I had spent a week gathering under her instructions, containing both internal and external confidential data. I was uneasy about storing them on the computer, so I saved them only on a USB drive and kept it under strict management in a locked drawer. However, that USB drive had vanished from inside the drawer. The company was in an uproar, with everyone in the department searching for the USB drive, and even the sales division director getting involved. Of course, Camila, Hannah, and I were questioned about the situation. Unfortunately, on the night before the disappearance, I had been working overtime at Camila's instructions. And when I left, I had confirmed that the USB drive was in the drawer and made sure to lock it before going home. But when I arrived this morning, the drawer was unlocked and the USB drive was gone.
You must have carelessly forgotten to lock it. How do you plan to take responsibility?
I was the one who instructed her to gather those documents, save them on the USB drive, and store it securely. It's also my lack of oversight.
That's right. It's also the manager's responsibility. Now, how do you intend to take responsibility?
Camila gleefully accused us while closing in on us. If it's a matter of lack of oversight, Camila, as the section chief, should also have had the obligation to supervise and manage me, her subordinate, but apparently that wasn't an issue. The sales division director had a stern look on his face, but he stopped Camila from pressing us further. However, it wasn't a complete exoneration. He only said that he wouldn't pursue responsibility until the investigation results were out. Moreover, we were strictly told to thoroughly manage data from now on. The sales division director probably believed that I had lost it. My reputation might have taken a significant hit, but there was something more important at the moment. At this rate, the project would be delayed. This was a crucial project for the company Hannah was involved with. We absolutely couldn't allow it to be delayed. From that day on, I stayed at the office until the last train every day and started gathering the lost data from scratch. Every day, I would stay at the company until the last possible moment to catch the last train and then sprint with all my might to make it on board. Concerned colleagues brought me snacks and coffee, but Camila did nothing during that time. On top of that, she kept pushing miscellaneous tasks onto me as usual and repeatedly threw mocking words at me while sneering. You really do love working overtime, don't you? You're so incompetent that you can't earn money otherwise. I'll bestow some work upon you out of pity. Saying that, she would dump miscellaneous tasks that anyone could do on me right before the end of working hours. And as always, she would leave on time. Fed up with the situation, a colleague took on the tasks Camila had pushed onto me, allowing me to focus on my own work. I immersed myself in rebuilding the data. At times, I felt like crying from exhaustion, but I couldn't give up. And with the project deadline approaching, I finally managed to reconstruct the lost data and successfully complete the project. Hannah was genuinely delighted by my success, and all my colleagues praised my efforts. Camila also commended me, but I didn't miss the evident jealousy in her eyes. Thanks to Hannah and my achievement of brilliantly leading an important project that was on the brink of delay to great success, we were entrusted with an even more significant project. It was a presentation at a certain famous overseas company. Moreover, it wasn't just any presentation. It was a competitive presentation where multiple rival companies would also be present. That company had been operating primarily in Europe and Asia, with employees and business partners mostly from overseas. It was the first time an American company had the opportunity to give a presentation. If we could succeed in this presentation and secure a deal, it would open up prospects for transactions with European and Asian companies as well. It was a chance we couldn't afford to miss for the further development of our company. I was given the opportunity to handle such an important presentation that held the future of the company in the balance, together with Hannah. The passion for work that had been extinguished by Camila's numerous instances of harassment reignited within me. I had numerous discussions with Hannah and proceeded with the preparations for the presentation. We created project proposals and materials, received Hannah's feedback, and revised them day after day. However, unlike being forced to redo them countless times by Camila for no reason, the revisions had clear purposes, so it didn't feel like a burden at all. In fact, it was almost enjoyable. During that time, Camila was eerily quiet. It was strange, but anyone would understand that it would be problematic to interfere with a presentation that held the company's future in the balance. I concluded that even Camila possessed that level of common sense and decency. And finally, the presentation materials were completed. From the perspective of the client, we created materials that addressed their concerns and made them feel confident in entrusting the project to our company. Upon seeing the finished materials, even Hannah's eyes welled up with tears.
It's perfect! I've never seen such outstanding materials before. With this, they'll definitely choose our company.
Hannah reviewed the materials with a serious expression multiple times before saying those words to commend me. I felt overjoyed to the point of wanting to jump up and down, having my painstakingly crafted materials, which I had worked on to the point of almost missing the last train numerous times, be recognized. On the day before the presentation, we proceeded with the preparations by printing the materials and compiling any potentially necessary data onto USB drives. For the first time in a while, I went home early to rest my body in preparation for the next day. And then, the day of the presentation arrived. Hannah and I were in the conference room that served as the presentation venue, holding our heads in our hands. The documents that had been printed and packed in a bag were, for some reason, completely drenched in coffee. Of course, I hadn't put any beverages inside the bag that also contained a laptop. In fact, I hadn't put a single item that contained moisture in it. Yet, the documents that were perfectly fine when I checked them 30 minutes before leaving the company were now soaked in coffee. And to make matters worse, even the laptop and USB drives were drenched in coffee. I had put them in a sealed plastic bag to prevent any accidents, but even inside that plastic bag, a generous amount of coffee had been poured. The pleasant aroma of slightly expensive milk coffee that could be purchased from the paper cup vending machine installed in the company filled the air. I recognized that smell. It was the smell of the coffee Camila always drank while slacking off and pushing work onto me. The thought that I had smelled it frequently enough to remember it made anger suddenly well up inside me.
Oh, what should we do now?
Beside me, as my anger grew, Hannah lamented while still holding her head in her hands. Disregarding our situation, the moderator of the presentation urged us to take the stage. Hannah looked around with a pale face. As we remained unmoving, not getting on stage or presenting any materials.
If you're not going to present, then leave.
Impatient voices from rival companies started to rise, saying, even so, being an overseas company, today's presentation was to be conducted in foreign languages. Moreover, since the person in charge was from the European region, the plan was to incorporate not only English but also French and Italian. The presentation materials had been prepared in various languages. Hannah was supposed to provide explanations while referencing them, but even she probably couldn't give the presentation without the materials. With an ashen face, Hannah still tried to make her way to the podium somehow. Instinctively, I placed my hand on her shoulder and stopped her. I didn't like standing out. The thought of being looked at strangely by everyone again, like in my high school days, or returning to a life where I was laughed at no matter what I did, made my legs tremble with trauma. However, Hannah, who had helped me out of those days, was in trouble. If I couldn't do anything here, when would I ever be able to repay the favor from back then? Camila was likely underestimating me. She thought that without the materials, I wouldn't be able to do anything. I would show her how naive that notion was. I smiled at Hannah and stepped onto the stage with shaking legs. Everyone's gaze focused on me. To dispel my fear, I deliberately put on a beaming smile. Everyone, I apologize for the wait. It seems our company's bag disappeared along with the materials using some kind of trick. While switching between French, Italian, German, and Chinese, I struck a pose in front of my chest, mimicking a magician. Laughter erupted from the host's table, where an irritated atmosphere had been looming. The opening wasn't bad. With this, I could somehow manage.
But don't worry, all the materials are in my head. We will deliver the physical documents at a later date, so for now, would you be so kind as to listen to my talk?
With that introduction, I began the presentation in various languages. Of course, it was a lie that I had memorized all the materials. But because I had revised them countless times, 80% of the content was in my head. I primarily used French, supplementing complex points with various languages from different countries. Before I knew it, everyone in the venue was listening intently to my talk with serious expressions, and when the presentation ended, the room was filled with applause and words of praise. The subsequent Q&A session was also lively, with numerous questions being exchanged. My presentation had achieved success beyond expectations. After the presentation, I stepped down from the stage, feeling relieved. The fear and anxiety in my heart had transformed into confidence and a sense of accomplishment.
Glenda, you did great! The presentation was a huge success, as expected of you.
Hannah, who usually spoke in a calm voice, rushed over to me, overcome with emotion. Her voice alone conveyed that my presentation had turned out far better than imagined. Seeing Hannah's expression change from one filled with despair just moments ago to a beaming smile, I sincerely felt glad that I had mustered the courage to give the presentation. However, the real issue was what came next. Why were the presentation materials drenched in coffee? I didn't know the reason, but there was no doubt that malicious intent was involved. And I had a strong suspicion about the person who had done it. However, there was no evidence. Despite my concerns, I returned to the company and resumed my daily routine. The only change was that I started recording the verbal abuse, unreasonable reprimands, and various acts of harassment I received from Camila. I also wrote down past incidents to the best of my memory. Meanwhile, I kept a close watch on her behavior. She frequently stepped away from her desk to take phone calls on her smartphone. Her voice lowered to a whisper as she headed for quiet, secluded areas. Normally, Camila wouldn't think twice about taking personal calls, chatting away loudly in the office. Curious about what she could be discussing, I discreetly followed her, staying out of sight. I knew it was impolite to eavesdrop, but something about the way the usually brazen she was sneaking around to have hushed conversations felt undeniably suspicious. Camila slipped into the file room, a place rarely visited by anyone during the workday. I couldn't go all the way in after her, so I paused outside the door. That's when I heard her angry voice emanating from within.
Don't give me that. I went to the trouble of sabotaging the files, and now you're telling me your presentation is about to lose? That's on you and your shoddy work, not me.
Hearing this, I instinctively pulled out my smartphone and started recording.
That money was compensation for leaking the files and ruining the presentation materials. How dare you ask for it back now?
Either she didn't realize I was nearby, or she didn't care, because Camila kept right on yelling at the person on the other end of the line. My mind flashed back to the USB drive that had mysteriously vanished a while ago. We had stored confidential company documents on it, locked it in a drawer, and kept it under tight security, yet somehow it had disappeared. Could it be that Camila had stolen it? Messing with presentation files was one thing, but taking internal information to sell to someone else was completely unacceptable. Camila was still talking, but I turned and headed straight for Hannah's office. I played the recording for her and honestly recounted everything I had overheard. Hannah's expression darkened, her face grave, as she listened to the part where she mentioned the money.
This is a huge problem. Glenda, your actions have brought this issue to light.
Hannah said she would report it to the higher-ups and suggest a full investigation. In that case, I would do my part to gather more information and evidence to assist her. Camila was about to lose everything due to her own short-sighted actions. 1 week after the competing presentation, Hannah informed me that our proposal had been selected and the deal was going forward. Apparently, she had already reported everything that happened that day to the CEO, and he would be coming by soon to personally commend me. As embarrassed as I felt, my happiness won out, and I couldn't help but smile. My dad's job had us moving around a lot, and it had caused me plenty of hardship, but thanks to that, I was now able to be of use to Hannah and the company. The thought filled me with a sense of pride. Hannah and everyone in the department was as thrilled as if it had happened to them personally, and soon there was talk of a celebration. But amidst all the smiles, only Camila looked grim. It made sense, of course. Camila had sabotaged our presentation materials in an attempt to make us fail. And she'd been paid by someone to do it. Now that her scheme had fallen through, she would naturally have to return whatever money she'd been given. But maybe there was even more to it than that. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her shoulders trembled every time her phone rang. Still, this was far from over. I stayed late to finish the busy work Camila had foisted on me, searching for evidence of her misdeeds whenever I could. Even mundane tasks like shredding documents and organizing email inboxes took on new meaning when I considered they might lead to proof of her actions. More than anything, Camila clearly underestimated me, because clues kept popping up one after another. It was actually kind of fun. In the papers I was supposed to shred, I found printouts of the missing confidential files. In her sent mail folder, There were emails where she had forwarded the presentation data to someone outside the company. Her complete lack of care when it came to handling evidence was so egregious, I almost wondered if it was some kind of trap. I was curious as to why there was so much evidence in the first place, but with this much compiled, I knew I could corner her. And as luck would have it, the CEO was planning to come praise me in person soon. I resolved that when he did, I would expose the full extent of Camilla's repeated wrongdoings in front of everyone. With renewed determination, I threw myself into completing my menial assignments and gathering evidence. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived when the CEO was slated to visit our sales department. The momentous occasion had everyone on edge from the moment we arrived that morning. The sound of the door to our floor opening caused all eyes to swivel in that direction at once. There, as expected, stood the CEO, the sales director, and Hannah.
Ah, you must be Glenda. I heard from the client and Hannah that you put together a truly excellent presentation.
It's all thanks to Hannah's mentoring and guidance. I responded to the CEO's words with complete sincerity. I could see Camilla's displeased expression out of the corner of my eye.
Excuse me, but you're my subordinate. I'm the one who's been instructing you the most, so you should be giving me the credit here.
Camilla started making a scene, right there in front of the CEO. In the past, I would have flashed her an insincere smile and agreed, but not anymore. I fixed Camilla with a steely glare.
With all due respect, while you have pushed your work onto me and yelled at me unreasonably, I don't recall ever being mentored by you, I said calmly, looking Camilla straight in the eye. What? That's a lie!
Camilla shouted, furrowing her brow in anger. Unfazed, I turned my gaze to the CEO. I had gathered plenty of evidence for this very moment. It was time for Camilla to reflect on her actions.
Mr. CEO, while the department heads may have already reported this to you, she has been treating her subordinates unreasonably and dumping her work on them. Not only that, she's even been causing damage to the company. Huh? What nonsense are you spouting? I wonder which one of us is spouting nonsense here.
I retorted, brushing off Camilla's vehement denial as I presented the additional evidence I had collected. I reiterated how Camilla had handed over important documents to someone in exchange for money and how she had tried to sabotage our presentation.
Isn't that right, Camilla?
I confronted her directly. However, a malicious smile spread across Camilla's face.
Don't lie! That was all you and Hannah, wasn't it? You're trying to pin the blame on me, she accused, her voice dripping with venom.
What? I was taken aback by Camilla's sudden allegation. Hannah too seemed shocked to find herself implicated, unable to hide her surprise. Seeing our reactions, Camilla's malevolent grin only deepened. Think about it logically. You claim you found evidence in the trash and emails I dumped on you, but do you really think I'd handle important things so carelessly? No way. It makes more sense that you and Hannah staged this to frame me. If you were the culprits, you'd have plenty of evidence. Camilla argued, narrowing her eyes shrewdly. I had to admit, it did seem odd that so much evidence was found so easily. But now it all made sense. Camilla had intentionally let us find the evidence to paint herself as a victim framed by our scheme, claiming Hannah and I were the true culprits. If I had been incompetent enough not to realize this, she probably planned to present it as her discovering evidence of my wrongdoing.
We did no such thing.
Lies. Or do you have any proof that I did it?
We do, actually.
Hannah's calm voice rang out. All eyes turned to her.
First, regarding you leaking confidential company information for money. We have your own words admitting to this, Camilla.
Hannah said, giving me a meaningful look. I took out my smartphone and played the recording. It's Camilla's phone call that day.
Eavesdropping? No way. No. This is fabricated, totally made up.
Camilla started to yell, but then seemed to realize it would be taken as a confession. In a fluster, she tried to paint herself as the victim of our setup. But Hannah continued undeterred.
It was also you who drenched our presentation materials in coffee. Everyone in the department can testify that it's the same coffee you always drink. So what? You just chose that coffee to frame me.
Camilla glared at Hannah, shouting in an attempt to push the blame onto us at all costs. Her gaze was filled with clear hostility. However, Hannah refuted her claim with a relaxed air.
No, that won't work. On that day, we did a final check 30 minutes before leaving the office. At that time, both the documents and laptop were perfectly fine. Meaning the materials were ruined in that short 30-minute window.
Hannah explained, pausing for a moment. She then placed a paper cup on the table. It was one of those cups from the coffee vending machine. A short size, or maybe one size smaller.
This paper cup is from that vending machine over there. To completely soak the documents and laptop in my bag, you'd need quite a few cups. At least 10, I'd say. Buying that many yourself in a 30-minute span would be very conspicuous. And Camila, you're too lazy to go buy them yourself, Hannah pointed out.
Camila's shoulders trembled at Hannah's words. Hannah smiled at the unnerved Camila.
Our colleagues in the department testified that you had various people fetching coffee for you that day. Many witnessed the untouched coffee cups lining your desk. This was shortly before our departure time. And after we left, those many cups had vanished from your desk and our documents and laptop were drenched in coffee. Anyone can figure out what that means, Hannah said pointedly.
Despite Hannah's sharp reasoning, Camila stubbornly continued making excuses.
I don't know what you're talking about. Everyone's just trying to frame me because they're jealous of how talented I am.
Since joining the company, I had never once seen her do any real work. I couldn't fathom how anyone could be jealous of her talent. I could understand if everyone thought this lazybones. I won't forgive her when it came to her. I found myself curious about how Camila's mind worked to reach such conclusions.
That's not true at all, these are the facts. But hypothetically, if that were the case, why do you think you ended up in a situation where your entire department is trying to frame you? Perhaps you should ask yourself that.
Hannah admonished Camila in a calm voice. In contrast, Camila bit her lip, her face contorted with rage. But Hannah didn't stop there.
We also know from email correspondence, phone records, and security camera footage that you stole confidential company information and tried to sabotage the presentation to damage the company. The CEO is already aware of this.
At those words, the color drained from Camila's face. She looked at the CEO in a panic. The CEO stared back at Camila with contempt in his eyes.
Not only damaging the company, but trying to pin your crimes on someone else? I never thought you were that kind of person.
Camila's face turned ashen at the CEO's words. Everyone in the department, including the head of sales, looked at her with cold, unforgiving eyes.
No way! Everyone knows I'm talented. It's the company's fault for promoting someone like Hannah over me. That's why I wanted to force Hannah's favorite to quit and ruin their career. I did nothing wrong.
Camila insisted like a petulant child, seeking agreement from those around her. But of course, no one took her side. Even the CEO held his head in his hands.
Hiring you was the biggest mistake of my life. But fortunately, it's a mistake that can be easily corrected,
he said, eyeing Camila with a quiet fury.
Camila, incompetent and nasty people like you are fired. I won't forgive you for the damage you've caused our company, so be prepared for the consequences. Fired? You're firing me?
Camila let out a scream of disbelief, her face deathly pale. As she struggled to accept reality, Hannah, the head of sales, and everyone in the department nodded emphatically in agreement with the CEO's decision to fire her. I too smiled at Camila.
That's right, you're the one being fired.
At my words, Camila crumpled to the ground. Afterwards, Camila was officially terminated. Apparently, the upper management's investigation revealed that Camila had committed many more offenses that even I wasn't aware of. The USB drive containing confidential company information that I was suspected of losing? It turns out she had stolen that too. The CEO and Hannah expressed their gratitude, saying that my accusation had prompted the higher-ups to launch a full investigation, exposing many of Camila's misdeeds. It seems the information Camila stole was sold to competitors, causing our company to lose profits to rival firms. Not only was she fired, but she's also being sued for damages. While Camila likely has the money she earned from selling our company's information, the funds she received in exchange for sabotaging the competitor's presentation will probably have to be returned at their demand. I don't know what will happen to her now that both the company and her client are demanding money from her, but her future is certainly bleaker than mine ever was in high school. With Camila gone, the vacant section chief position was somehow given to me. I told Hannah that there were many people more suited for the role than me, as I hadn't even been with the company for a year, but she wouldn't hear of it. In fact, everyone in the department recommended me for the position. They said that seeing me work diligently without complaint, even as Camila treated me like a servant and harassed me, made them want someone like me as their boss. Hannah promised to personally teach me about management and other necessary skills. While I'm anxious, I'm also excited for this new step in my career. Even as section chief, I won't become like Camila. I'll continue to work hard for the sake of the department and the people who believe in me. We've made our own cheap products, so goodbye. Those were the sudden words from Daisy, the daughter of the president of a longtime client company.
I understand. We won't deliver to you ever again,
I managed to say in a strained voice. Daisy laughed gleefully, clearly pleased with herself. But her laughter won't last long. I returned to my company, determined to get back at her, and began preparing to confront her. The next day, Antonio, the president, showed up looking pale. My name is Agatha. I lost my husband early on and have been supporting the company he left behind ever since. At first, I struggled as I didn't know what I was doing and things weren't going well. But I knew I couldn't continue like this, so I visited companies my husband had connections with and desperately pleaded with them to teach me the business. I absorbed everything they taught me, and once I gained the recognition of my employees as their president, I studied even harder. My employees supported me in various ways, developing unique technologies and creating hit products for me. I grew increasingly determined never to let this company go under. As I worked tirelessly, I suddenly realized I was already 65. At an age when most office workers retire, I was still going strong. Of course, my successor had already been chosen from among the executives who had supported me for many years. Still, I loved my job and wanted to continue as long as my body would allow, and my successor understood that. Today was our annual New Year's party. The atmosphere of the venue had changed significantly since I was young, but it was an event we never failed to hold. The New Year's party was always held in a hotel banquet hall in a buffet style. As the appointed time arrived, the presidents of companies related to mine would show up. I was 65 now, so I had experienced my fair share of generational changes. The faces in attendance were a little different from last year, so I surveyed the room with a deep sense of nostalgia. This time, I was participating with the male employee who would become the next president. I had told him to make sure to communicate with those around him and conduct himself in a manner befitting a president. As I watched over him making the rounds with a slightly nervous expression, I also greeted the presidents of companies I had relationships with. Many of the presidents of companies who had helped me when I was young were also in attendance. They were all around my age, but they still seemed to be active and going strong. Seeing everyone as energetic as they were last year put me at ease. Being able to welcome a new year together with such lively companions was a source of vitality for me. As I was absent-mindedly looking around, I suddenly bumped into someone. I quickly turned around to find a young woman I didn't recognize standing there. Since it was our first meeting, I assumed she must be the wife of one of the company presidents. But had anyone recently informed me of their marriage? While pondering this, I immediately apologized to her. However, she didn't apologize back and instead looked me up and down as if appraising me.
Is something wrong?
I asked, feeling suspicious. The woman then spoke to me in a mocking tone.
Not really, but you're kind of in the way, you know? If you're just going to space out, shouldn't you go home, Grandma? I bet you're someone's mother, right? There are always people who tag along with their sons like this, or maybe your mama's boy of a son begged you to come with him.
I couldn't hide my surprise at her unexpected words. I had never met someone so rude upon first introduction. As I stared at her wide-eyed in astonishment, the woman returned to her seat. It was the seat of President Antonio's. He had built his company into a large enterprise that maintained profitability every year. Recently, he had been actively engaging in overseas dealings, and his company had been associated with mine since its founding. However, he was also quite advanced in age. His wife was still alive, so this woman couldn't be his spouse. As I observed for a while, I noticed a young child seated next to her. The child's face looked familiar, and I involuntarily let out an "oh" sound. That must be Martin, President Antonio's 5-year-old grandson he had mentioned before. Which would make this woman likely Daisy, President Antonio's daughter. I never imagined that the timid president's daughter would grow up to have such an overbearing attitude. After returning to her seat, Daisy soon began yelling at her son Martin. Apparently, Martin had started playing with the fork in front of him.
Seriously? You're going to be the president of a big company when you grow up. Why are you doing such childish things? Ah, that's dirty, stop it. Don't touch that with your bare hands. I am sorry.
Martin stammered. Martin stammered.
Don't cry. You're being too loud, hand it over. Are you saying you won't listen to Mom? Enough with your sniveling.
She snatched the fork out of Martin's hand as she shouted at him. It's normal to scold children when they do something wrong, but her way of scolding seemed a bit rough even from an outsider's perspective. I rushed over to them without thinking.
You can't talk to him like that,
I said. She glared at me out of the corner of her eye and clicked her tongue with an annoyed expression.
What, you're still here? Could you not interfere with how I choose to discipline my child?
Daisy was clearly hostile towards me. Even so, I firmly chided her. But your child is crying, you know. At that moment, President Antonio hurried over. After greeting me, he immediately turned to her and began scolding her with a frown.
Daisy, calm down. It's only natural that Martin would cry if you get that angry. You're too soft on Martin, Dad. Kids won't understand unless you scold them a bit harshly sometimes.
She said that and then snapped at President Antonio.
Don't butt in.
Hearing those words, he fell silent with a troubled look on his face. Then, with the same perplexed expression, I'm sorry for the commotion. He apologized to me. As I reassured him, saying,
Parenting is tough.
I thought that he probably couldn't be too firm with his daughter due to his gentle nature. But as a father, shouldn't he properly scold her when necessary? I gazed at him with complicated feelings. In any case, Daisy can hardly be called a good mother. At this rate, her child might grow up to be warped. She may consider it none of my business, but if she's struggling with parenting, I've also raised children, so I might be able to offer some advice. However, when she saw my concerned face, she scowled in displeasure and lashed out as if taking her frustration out on me.
Wait, you were the president? I totally thought you were someone's mom. I mean, your age, you know? Well, you seem about ready to retire, right? Wouldn't it be better for the next president if you hurried up and vacated the position? Daisy, watch your tongue. How could you say such a thing?
But it's true, isn't it?
Even people much younger than her are considering me for the next president. So what does it say about the company to have an old woman clinging to the position?
Oh, don't take it the wrong way.
I'm just offering some advice.
I felt my face stiffen involuntarily upon hearing her words. What she said did have some truth to it, but there's a way to say things. As if shaking off my irritation,
I suppose so.
I ambiguously replied. Humph. Daisy looked at me with a triumphant expression and scoffed.
Your company supplies to my dad's company, right? That basically makes you our subsidiary, doesn't it? If you're the president, shouldn't you think more about your employees before complaining to me? That's enough, Daisy. President Agatha is your elder. Show some respect. Don't yell at me. I'm just trying to teach her to know her place since she doesn't seem to get it. Age has nothing to do with it.
She glared at him in annoyance as she spoke. President Antonio wiped the cold sweat from his brow, looking flustered.
For your company to survive in the coming era, you need someone who can flexibly adapt to modern changes. If you can't take my advice, you might be in for a rude awakening someday.
With those words, she spat out her warning, forcefully grabbed Martin's hand, and left the venue. Martin started wailing loudly again as his arm was suddenly yanked. Daisy dragged him along, indifferent to her child's distress. Watching her back as she walked away, I felt unsettled. Sure, I may have butted in unnecessarily, but I didn't deserve to be berated to that extent. Besides, as the president, I do my best to consider what's best for the company. The nerve of her, saying such rude things without even knowing that. President Antonio apologized to me profusely, seeing the displeased look on my face, but my mood remained gloomy the entire day. As a result, I decided to skip the after party and head straight home. A few days after that New Year's party, Daisy unexpectedly showed up at my company. When I immediately asked my secretary if I had an appointment with her today, the secretary shook her head in surprise. Apparently, she had come to our company without making a reservation. Even if it was an urgent matter, how impolite of her. As I warily wondered what business she had with us, Daisy smirked at me with a malicious expression.
Oh, so you really were the president. I'm here today as a stand-in for the president. By the way, have you decided on your retirement date? I suppose I could throw you a farewell party on behalf of the company, you know.
The moment she entered the company, Daisy started spouting such disrespectful nonsense. I felt a flash of irritation but took a deep breath before asking her what she wanted. She then glared at me in displeasure, glancing around. I have something to discuss with the next president, not you. I want to talk about the future plans. I even came all the way here, so where are they? Don't tell me you haven't chosen a successor yet? The next president is currently out. If it's about company matters, I can hear you out. Your stubborn head probably won't understand anyway. Hurry up and call them back. I refused her demand, telling her it was impossible as she shouted at me in frustration. In the first place, the next president was away on a business trip. Even if she demanded their immediate return, it would take several hours. If she had properly informed us of her visit today, this misunderstanding could have been avoided. When I pointed that out, Daisy's face turned bright red as she yelled, I am the daughter of a major corporation's president. How dare a tiny company like yours not heed my words? Who do you think you are? The impossible remains impossible. Please come back to the company on another day. I spoke as politely as I could, but her voice only grew louder. I don't have as much free time as you. I'm raising my only son while working as the acting president of the company. I took time out of my busy schedule to come here, and you're looking down on me because I'm young? I bet you'd have nothing to do if my company stopped placing orders, right? Shouldn't you be accommodating my plans then? Am I wrong? No matter how unreasonable or absurd her claims were, my stance on refusing her demands remained unchanged. In the first place, her yelling didn't frighten or faze me in the slightest. Perhaps sensing my unwavering attitude, Daisy caught her breath and bit down on her back teeth in frustration.
Fine, I get it. Come to our company at the same time 3 days from now. I'll make you regret going against me.
She rattled off those words in rapid succession and then dashed out of the president's office. She slammed the door shut behind her, as if venting her frustration, causing a loud bang to reverberate through the room. My secretary, perhaps overwhelmed by her demeanor, trembled with tears in her eyes. She was still young, so it was understandable that Daisy scared her. As I calmed my secretary down, I pondered what she could be plotting. As a president, I had faced many problems, but this was my first time dealing with someone so unreasonable and lacking in common sense. I might need to prepare myself to counter her, no matter what she threw at me. With those thoughts secretly in mind, I began to contemplate how to handle her next move. 3 days later, I headed to the president's office as Daisy had instructed. I had assumed President Antonio would be there as well, but when I entered the room with a bow, only Daisy was present. Sitting in the president's chair, she glared at me intently. Despite having done nothing wrong, it seemed I had completely earned her dislike. The discussion was unlikely to be a pleasant one. Thinking it unfortunate, I offered a gift as a conversation starter, but she accepted it only to thrust it at the secretary standing beside her, showing no interest. Before beginning the discussion, I asked where President Antonio was. At that, she grinned as if she had been waiting for the question. According to her, he had gone out to resolve some trouble and had left the role of president to her for the time being.
By the way, my mother knows nothing about running a company, so that's why I'm serving as the acting president. You probably didn't know, but I'm incredibly capable. Managing a company is a piece of cake for me,
Daisy boasted, puffing out her chest with a smirk. From there, her self-praise began. Apparently, after studying economics in college and teaching herself business management, Daisy had been working at her father's company as the next president. It was thanks to her achievements that her father's company was able to establish overseas dealings. She had even decided to pass the company on to her son when she stepped down as president. Her husband had run off, refusing to acknowledge their child as soon as their son was born, but Daisy had overcome that adversity, raising her son properly and building her current position.
Everything I do is right. You complained about my parenting methods the other day, but that's none of your business. You've got some nerve.
With those words, she concluded her personal story. I responded with a vague acknowledgement and tried to subtly appease her. To my surprise, she was incredibly easy to win over and beamed at me, saying,
"I'm glad you understand."
She seemed to take great pride in her accomplishments. I continued to subtly praise her as we carried on our conversation. At this rate, I thought she might be easy to handle. However, she turned out to be a more difficult person than I had anticipated.
So, what was the matter you wanted to discuss?
I prompted, and Daisy finally got to the point. Daisy mentioned that she had some concerns about the products my company was supplying. I wondered if there were any areas for improvement, but she silently handed me the documents she had in front of her. The papers detailed the compensation my company was receiving. I couldn't quite grasp her intentions, but I accepted the documents and skimmed through them. However, I couldn't find anything amiss. As I tilted my head, wondering what this was all about, she smirked. "We've started making our own cheap products, so goodbye." For a moment, I couldn't comprehend her words. Even so, I'm sure my eyes were wide with shock. Seeing my reaction, she laughed heartily, clearly enjoying herself.
"This is what happens when you go against me. I was so pissed off that I had your company investigated, and what you're doing is nothing short of betrayal." "What on earth do you mean? Are you still going to play dumb?" "Fine, I'll spell it out for you. No matter how you look at it, your company's products are ridiculously overpriced, aren't they? You might have fooled my dad, but don't think you can fool me the same way.
She mocked me with a triumphant look. I tried to argue back, questioning what made our products overpriced, but she firmly stated that her company could now produce them more cheaply and would be terminating our contract immediately. Her words left me flustered, and I racked my brain for a way to persuade her. This company was one of our biggest clients. If our contract with them was canceled, our company would be in jeopardy. The employees who had believed in me and followed me might lose their jobs. I couldn't let that happen. With that strong conviction, I passionately explained how our products differed from those of other companies and what aspects President Antonio had appreciated, leading to our long-standing contract. However, Daisy refused to listen to reason.
Your company is outdated. Cost reduction is essential in the coming era. With people talking about high prices these days, this is for the benefit of consumers too. If you can't even understand that and keep up with the current situation, I think you should seriously consider stepping down as president for the sake of your company and employees.
Daisy spoke in an exasperated tone, so I asked if President Antonio also agreed with the contract termination. She brushed it off as if it were irrelevant.
I'm the acting president now. I've been given full authority over this company. I'm sure my dad would support my decision.
Then, she waved her hand dismissively as if there was nothing more to discuss. Her exceedingly rude attitude almost made me lose my composure and lash out in anger right then and there.
I'll bring the contract termination documents to your company tomorrow, so don't try to run away.
Her words were laced with venom. I was about to resign myself to accepting the situation when a clever idea suddenly occurred to me.
I understand. We won't deliver to you ever again,
I said in a strained voice. She became cheerful and showed a smile. Her laughter would be short-lived. I returned to my company and began preparing to confront her when she brought the documents tomorrow. She had been so insolent that she couldn't complain if she experienced a bit of pain. With that thought, I quietly waited for tomorrow to come. The next day, 5 minutes before my scheduled meeting with Daisy, I was wrapping up some paperwork when there was a knock on the door of the president's office, and my secretary's voice rang out.
Come in.
I called out, and my secretary opened the door with her usual polite demeanor. Ushered in by the secretary were a triumphant-looking Daisy and a pale-faced President Antonio. I immediately thought that what I had set in motion yesterday was already taking effect and inwardly smirked.
Thank you for coming,
I said, offering words of appreciation before inviting the two to sit on the sofa. Daisy sat down on the sofa with a confident stride and slid the contract termination documents across to me. Beside her, President Antonio was sweating profusely, still seemingly unable to grasp the situation.
Are you really going through with the contract termination?
He asked in a feeble voice. To him, I simply replied,
Of course,
and picked up a pen.
This is truly unfortunate. We are also shocked that it has come to this. Thank you for your patronage until now.
Before signing, I looked straight at President Antonio and spoke in a calm tone. At that, his face turned even paler.
Just sign it already,
Daisy urged me, so I obediently signed the documents. Witnessing this, his face turned ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He must have been shocked that I signed so readily. Before I could finish signing,
Wait a moment,
President Antonio cried out. With that momentum, he leaned forward, pressed his head against the desk, and apologized in a strained voice. Please give us another chance. My daughter's rudeness towards you is my responsibility. Please, won't you reconsider? After shouting those words, President Antonio apologized over and over, pleading with me. Surprised by her father's sudden behavior, Daisy's eyes darted around in confusion.
Wait, stop! What's going on? You apologize too. At this rate, our company will. What is this about? What did you do?
She questioned me in a panic. I calmly explained to her.
When I told them that our company would be terminating our contract with yours, the presidents of the companies under our umbrella all said they would cut ties with your company as well. I merely informed President Antonio of that.
At my words, her eyes grew wide. Beside her, President Antonio held his head in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I observed the two of them with a cold gaze.
How did this happen? It's your fault. You went and unilaterally terminated the contract. Agatha is my benefactor. The reason I was able to grow this company so much is because she supported me. And you destroyed that in a single day.
He finally couldn't take it anymore and glared at her with bloodshot eyes. She was stunned by his words. She finally seemed to understand the gravity of what she had done.
How can this old hag's measly company have so much influence? Watch your mouth. Agatha took over and protected this company after her husband passed. Even though the scale of her company is smaller than ours, it has persisted thanks to her efforts and the high regard people have for her. This outcome is only natural. I was the one who was wrong. If I hadn't trusted you just because you're my daughter, this wouldn't have.
He clung to me in desperation. He begged me to somehow forgive them for this incident. Seeing him in such a state nearly moved me to pity, but I steeled myself and maintained a stern expression. All of this was to ensure that our company would never again face such a threat. Amid all this, Daisy's cell phone rang loudly. She said it was a work call, so I urged her to answer it. After hesitantly picking up the phone, Daisy's face immediately turned pale, and her mouth fell open.
What? What did you say?
Daisy arched her back in surprise. Seeing her reaction, President Antonio asked what was wrong.
The cost-reduced products I made to replace the ones from here have arrived, and they're all defective. How can this be? Those simple parts should be easy to replicate with our technology.
Watching her flustered state, I chuckled softly. Apparently displeased by my laughter, Daisy turned to me with a bright red face, glaring accusingly. That's impossible. Those products utilize unique techniques that our craftsmen have honed over generations. Even if you manage to create similar imitations, they won't be usable. Huh? Our company and yours have different histories, you see. I said that with a boastful attitude, seizing the opportunity. This is what happens when they underestimate my company's craftsmen. Also, our manufacturing methods are trade secrets, so we haven't taught them to your company's craftsmen. Even if you knew how to make them, we have patents, so you can't copy and produce them. If you made them in secret, our employees would notice right away. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter to your company now that the contract is being terminated. Upon hearing my words, Daisy was left speechless. For a few seconds, silence filled the president's office. Both of them had lost their will to fight, their faces ashen. Seeing their reactions as I had expected, I was mostly satisfied, but I decided to execute phase 2 of my plan. Do you want to pretend the contract termination never happened? At my words, President Antonio's head shot up. Seeing him nod vigorously, even as tears streamed down his face, I made a certain proposal. However, there is one condition. From now on, you must never let Daisy be involved in management. I can't trust her. In fact, from the moment I heard she was the next president, I had no intention of continuing business with your company. The future of a company led by someone like her is set in stone. "What will you do, President Antonio?" Without hesitation.
"I understand,"
he replied. Hearing his answer, Daisy angrily confronted him.
"Why? I've been studying to take over the company. You know how talented I am, don't you, Dad? Who else is going to succeed you if not me? In the first place, you're the one who decided you were the next president on your own, right? I never intended to entrust the management to you. There's a woman among our company's executives who is more capable than you. I wanted to leave the company to her. But then you said you wanted to be the next president, so I... Don't tell me, that impudent woman? I absolutely won't accept that.
It seemed she had forcibly claimed the position of the next president. I hadn't met the woman they mentioned yet, but she, biting her lip in frustration, spun around to face me.
Don't tell me you did this because that impudent woman told you to.
She cast unwarranted suspicion on me, but I shook my head.
I don't know who that woman is. But President Antonio, if she's truly competent, I believe choosing her is the right path as a president. Through this incident, have you learned the consequences of being lenient just because she's your daughter?
As I said that, he replied,
I understand,
while tears streamed down his face.
What happened this time is unforgivable. Daisy, take responsibility and resign. If you want to succeed the company, you need more experience. I'll never let you work at my company again. Get out of our house too. That treatment is too harsh. I'm your biological daughter. And I can't believe you're entrusting the company to someone who's not even family. Martin is already studying to take over the company in the future, you know. We need to talk about Martin as well. I never reprimanded your attitude towards him because I believed you were growing into an adult. But I always had this nagging feeling that your education wasn't benefiting Martin. What are you saying? I'm his mother. You're going to take a child away from his mother? That's just cruel.
Daisy glared at him as she said that, but he maintained a serious expression and intimidated her with a low voice, saying they needed to have a family discussion. Hearing his tone, she swallowed her words and hung her head. I believe we're done here. Let's forget about the contract termination. I look forward to working with you in the future. I'll personally speak to the presidents of the other companies as well. As I said that, his complexion improved somewhat. Daisy looked frustrated, but seemed to have no intention of saying anything more. He dragged her out of the room as she kept her head down. After that, Daisy resigned from her position as the next president. The woman they had mentioned took over as the next president. She came to greet me once, and unlike Daisy, she was a graceful and intelligent woman. Apparently, she was really kicked out of the house and told not to return until she could support herself. After a thorough discussion about Martin, he chose President Antonio over Daisy. Daisy reportedly cried about being an unlucky parent, but it seems he had been constantly oppressed by her and found it painful. President Antonio empathized with Martin's feelings and decided to raise him. Even though her child was taken away, Daisy threatened, I'll sue you. But with Martin's testimony, her lawsuit apparently didn't hold up. In the end, she was forced to leave the house and live on her own. The presidents under my company resumed their dealings with President Antonio. However, due to this incident, his standing took a significant hit. He was shocked to see his company's performance, which had been steadily rising, now stagnating. Furthermore, various plans Daisy had carried out at the company without permission came to light, resulting in billions in losses. It's unclear whether President Antonio's company can recover, but since he bears some responsibility, I hope he reflects deeply on this. My company avoided the contract termination and maintained its performance. In fact, as President Antonio desperately tried to regain his company's performance, we received a flood of orders from him, increasing our revenue even more than before. Moreover, an overseas company that had taken notice of my company directly proposed a business deal. By accepting that deal, my company successfully expanded overseas. Faced with rewarding work, our employees united and even succeeded in developing new technologies. Seeing my employees working with bright expressions, I wholeheartedly feel that it was truly worthwhile to diligently protect this company.
You're really clueless, aren't you? The inheritance, the inheritance. Hand it over already,
said Mary, my sister-in-law, barging in as soon as the front door was opened, happily talking at her own pace. Despite not being close, her sudden demand left me baffled.
If it weren't for Henry, I wouldn't even want to come near such a gloomy place.
Indeed, to Mary, adorned in flashy clothes and accessories, the home of her contrasting brother Henry and his daughter-in-law, me, must have seemed dreary. However, I thought Mary, who talked about the inheritance at the doorway without even looking at her late brother's portrait, was much more spiteful. This attitude of Mary's wasn't new. She boasted about her confidence in her appearance and often treated the gentle-natured Henry harshly. I had heard from him that once he began to advance in his career and earn a significant income, Mary changed her attitude and started cozying up to him. I was truly appalled by Mary's lack of compassion, barely visiting when Henry was repeatedly in and out of the hospital and not crying at all during the funeral. I had decided to have nothing more to do with her, but greedy Mary wouldn't have it.
We don't have all day, hurry up. Sally must be busy too, right?
Mary, with eyes gleaming with anticipation, was convinced she was entitled to the inheritance. However, I possessed something that would utterly change that expression. It was the last words from my late husband. Read this, and you'll understand everything. I am Sally, a widow in her mid-60s, living a modest life. I lost my beloved husband about a month ago, his long-standing illness having worsened. We met and married in our 40s, so we had no children. The loss felt overwhelming, having supported each other for 20 years. Was there any need to keep cooking for someone when there were no children? I considered following Henry but, embarrassingly, lacked the courage. Furthermore,
no matter what happens to me, live on without losing heart. Sally, you're an independent and remarkable woman,
Henry often told me. Ignoring his now final words was something I could not do. Life changed drastically after Henry passed away. I witnessed his last moments at the hospital in the middle of the night, then went straight to arrange the funeral, which proceeded smoothly. This time, being too overwhelmed to mourn or dwell on my thoughts about Henry was somewhat a relief. Many people, including my sister and her husband, encouraged me and helped prepare for the funeral, which helped me get through this month. I barely remember this period.
Sally, you did a commendable job as the chief mourner. Henry must be resting in peace in heaven, assured by your strength,
my sister later told me. Though everything was new and I was constantly on edge, which led to a few days of illness, it wasn't all bad. More people attended the funeral than I had anticipated. Henry had worked at a renowned company and was a senior executive, so I expected many attendees I wouldn't know. However, colleagues from the company praised Henry's character and some even shed tears. Among them were people who had traveled from overseas branches, sharing stories of going out for drinks with Henry during his business trips. It was regrettable that I couldn't spend ample time with each of them, but I made sure to note down everyone's names and addresses to send thank you notes and small tokens of appreciation later. My sister and her husband took care of these arrangements, allowing me some respite now. I'm endlessly grateful for Henry's gentle nature, which, I believe, made this possible. I want to boast about being blessed with such wonderful people, but lately, I've had doubts. Primarily because of his sister, my sister-in-law, Mary. Despite being 12 years younger than Henry, Mary is still youthful compared to women her age. Her high sense of beauty made her somewhat of a celebrity in the neighborhood. And she is well aware of it, seemingly enjoying her days enhancing her beauty. I have no issue with that. Though she's turning 58 and the appropriateness of wearing miniskirts is debatable, it's not for others to judge, so it doesn't bother me. The problem lies in her constantly making snide remarks towards me. I'm not as pretty as her, nor do I share her enthusiasm for yoga and spas.
Sally, you always look so dowdy. Aren't you embarrassed? Henry was wealthy. Why didn't he marry someone more beautiful?
She'd say, evaluating what I wore as if appraising my worth whenever we met.
What's with using an unknown brand bag at your age? And those shoes, how long have you been wearing them? You were wearing those the last time we met, right? It's easy for me to tell when someone lacks taste, even if their clothes are nice, because it shows in their accessories. Won't Henry buy you any? He doesn't desire material things, so if you asked, he would buy them for you, wouldn't he?
I have enough bags and shoes, though not as many as her. Being called sloppy is one thing, but I've never been one to hoard items. In fact, I make it a point to discard at least one old item whenever I buy something new, so my home is rather clean. Whenever Henry asked me if I wanted anything for our anniversary or my birthday, I would plan a trip without hesitation. I've always believed that memories are invaluable and cannot be bought. Now that he is gone, I'm glad I made those choices. Mary would mock me indirectly with her remarks.
Henry wasn't much to look at, so in that sense, you're well suited. But you must have married him for his money, right?
No matter the insult, she always concludes with this. This is the issue I have with Mary's behavior. She spreads rumors among relatives that I married Henry for his money. Apparently, there were plenty of women who approached him with that intention. He wasn't one for gambling or nightlife. His hobby was mostly fishing, so I remember being surprised by the amount of his savings when we got married. However, I never intended to splurge his wealth. At that time, I had been working for 20 years at the same company and had my own savings, though not as much as him. Sharing similar values about not spending excessively was one reason we got married, not because I was after Henry's money as Mary claims. I've tried explaining this to her and asking her to correct this misunderstanding with our relatives, but she never listens. It seems she's decided we're incompatible and constantly finds fault with me. Say has always been fiercely competitive, and Henry, during his lifetime, tried to avoid her as much as possible. This might be why she barely helped with Henry's funeral arrangements. Indeed, I was the chief mourner, but whenever Henry fell ill or was hospitalized, she would never offer words of concern, no matter how often I contacted her. On the contrary, there was a time when she got angry and said,
"Don't contact me about every little thing."
After that, I internally decided not to inform Henry about anything that happened. However, thinking that letting Henry know could affect his condition, I would lie gently in front of him, saying, "Mary was worried about you." In the end, she never showed herself to Henry before he passed away, so even at the wake, she maintained an attitude as if she was there out of obligation, almost as though it was someone else's problem. Yet, ever since she heard Henry was ill, she hardly had an appetite and cried so much she couldn't cry anymore.
Maybe that's why she looks so down now. She said she couldn't visit the hospital because she didn't want to see Henry in a weakened state.
The relatives whispered. Hearing this, I was overwhelmed with an indescribable frustration and, compounded by the shock of losing Henry, tears began to blur my vision. Mary, spoken of as a tragic heroine, had skin too radiant for someone who supposedly lost their appetite, and naturally, there were no tear stains or signs of swollen eyes. Despite telling me not to contact her, she seemed humble in front of the relatives. If my sister hadn't been there to sense my feelings and tactfully lead me away, I might have lost my composure and shouted something at the relatives. Knowing Mary could not even show respect for the deceased, I resolved to have nothing to do with her going forward. After the funeral, I gradually sorted through Henry's belongings, balancing work and household duties, and at the same time, started to regain my composure. At first, each item of Henry's that disappeared felt like erasing a memory, but I reminded myself that the memories with Henry were held most dearly in my heart. I cherished the time spent with those who attended the funeral, slowly reclaiming my tranquil life. Then, predictably, it was Mary who disrupted these peaceful days. She rang the doorbell and knocked repeatedly.
Sally, you're there, aren't you? Your sister has come all this way, so open up.
She called out, though I never considered her my sister. Mary raised her voice as if to perform for the neighbors. With laundry hanging outside, playing dead wasn't an option.
What were you doing? I was about to get sunburnt waiting,
she said the moment I unlocked the door, barging in without hesitation, thrusting a bag from a well-known foreign brand into my hands and beginning to remove her shoes.
What's this all about?
I managed to ask, to which she dramatically sighed.
I've been so busy and couldn't visit, thinking you might be feeling down all by yourself. So, I brought something nice,
she said, retrieving the bag she'd handed me to reveal its contents while standing. Accessories, perfume, and high-end baked goods similar to those Mary usually enjoyed, none of which seemed fitting for me. Did she really think I would be delighted to receive these? Moreover, her behavior today was unusually gentle.
I may have been harsh on you before, but you were the woman my only brother chose. I didn't want to hand him over to a gold digger. But seeing you at the funeral made me realize you're different. Only someone who truly loved Henry could shed so many tears and give a speech with disheveled hair, disregarding what others think.
It seems she's not used to praising people. Even when she tries to appease me, she can't help but comment on my appearance or actions. However, the way she looked at me carried a sort of passion, as if she was in the presence of someone she respected. Mary's overtly changed demeanor only left me utterly bewildered, as she continued to shower me with what seemed like compliments. Despite my growing discomfort from not knowing what she truly thought. I'm sorry. I still haven't settled the estate affairs. It's not in a state for visitors right now, I conveyed gently. Her eyes narrowed, returning to her usual cold gaze.
Do you really think I came all this way just to see your annoying faces?
She shouted.
It's about the inheritance, obviously. You shouldn't have to be told that. What?
Confused by her gesture, indicating I should hand something over, I was at a loss.
How long do you think I've been waiting? I have a pretty good idea of how much Henry earned, so I know roughly how much I should be getting from the inheritance. It's pointless for you to try to keep it all. Hand it over now. If you're thinking of deceiving me, I'll call a lawyer and the police.
The division of property is being handled by a lawyer, so there's no deception involved.
Don't play dumb. I'm entitled to a share of the inheritance, aren't I?
She yelled, her face turning red. Given that Henry and Mary were siblings, it would be natural for Mary to have a share. However, Henry often spoke about this issue, expressing his concern. Mary, known for her beauty, alongside their parents who favored her, had bullied Henry since childhood for his looks. To prove them wrong, Henry excelled academically, attended a national university through scholarships and part-time jobs, and eventually climbed the corporate ladder in a major company. The only times Henry spoke of himself were about overcoming those dark times. Naturally, anyone would be troubled at the thought of such a person receiving an inheritance. When Henry confided in me about this dilemma, I urged him to decide for himself. I only learned of Henry's decision after his passing. Unaware of this, her demeanor shifted dramatically, railing against me.
For a daughter-in-law to almost take the entire inheritance, you're just as greedy for money. I always suspected something fishy about you marrying that plain man after 40. The only reason to spend a lifetime with someone who has no merit but his wealth. I listened patiently to your talk of love, values, and all that. Just give me half of your share right now, and I'll disappear.
It appears the sweet words and gifts were just a ploy to wrest his inheritance from me. Having been a target of her animosity for so long, I had anticipated there might be ulterior motives behind her sudden change of behavior. Witnessing her brazenly shout in the entryway, I realized just how lacking her sense of morality was. I wondered what Henry, peacefully listening from heaven, would think of all this. I told Mary to wait there for a moment, intending to show her a particular document. Upon hearing this, Mary's eyes sparkled instantly.
You really understand me. Let's go eat some delicious French cuisine with that money next time.
And she blurted out something nonsensical. Not wanting to be swept up in Mary's pace, I retrieved the document from the back room without agreeing to her plans and handed it to her.
Please, this is from Henry. You can have it,
I said as I gave her the document, Henry's last letter. Essentially his will. Mary, sensing what it was, quickly opened it. Her eyebrows, meticulously shaped, moved up and down, clearly agitated by the letter's contents.
What does this mean? I don't understand this.
Her ignorance stemmed from her own choice not to see Henry. The words almost reached my lips, but seeing Mary collapse weakly into a seat, I doubted they would reach her now. The will stated that Henry bequeathed all his possessions to me, as a final gesture of appreciation for a life shared in mutual support and love, leaving a passionately written message too private to read aloud. Reading this, I felt a renewed warmth for Henry, who thought of me even while battling his illness, making it clear Mary would receive not a cent. Despite the clear answer, Mary, unable or unwilling to accept reality.
What does this mean?
She murmured. Her face paled, and no response came from her as I half forced her out and quickly locked the door. Through the door's glass, I faintly saw Mary's shadow sway and stagger away. Feeling relieved that she wouldn't bother me again after reading the will was short-lived, the next afternoon, Mary called.
I never thought you could be such a villain, Sally. How dare you deceive me?
Her fury was palpable even over the phone, sending a chill down my spine. But I had done nothing wrong, nor did I deserve to be slandered as a villain by her. I was about to respond with renewed determination, but she cut me off.
You're probably feeling pretty good about knocking me down, aren't you? But sadly for you, you're about to experience real pain. This is your punishment for angering me. Don't think apologizing now will make me forgive you.
I could vaguely understand she was talking about the inheritance, but I had no idea what she meant by me feeling pain or apologizing. Confused and silent, perhaps she thought my silence was hesitation, as she began to laugh loudly.
See? It's too late for apologies. I'd love to visit you right now, but I have an appointment with my lawyer, so I'm busy.
Her triumphant statement made no sense to me. Why she needed a lawyer or why she felt the need to inform me about it was beyond me. Instead of bothering with me, she could have gone to her usual yoga or spa sessions, I thought idly, only to be interrupted by her yelling.
Don't you understand the situation? Talking to you is just frustrating, a real beauty killer. I'm not satisfied with the division of the estate and am preparing to sue over it. Whether you schemed in secret with your husband or not, it's inconceivable for a daughter-in-law to take everything. It's against the law. Thinking showing me Henry's will would silence me was a big mistake. To think you'd exploit a sick Henry for your gain, you have no conscience. I have a right to the inheritance, and I intend to claim it.
It seems she was under the impression I was hoarding the inheritance. By manipulating Henry to write the will in my favor, which finally broke my silence. It would be a waste of your time to go. The will was directly handed to a lawyer by Henry himself. I only read it afterwards, so there was no trickery involved. Plus, I've been informed by the lawyer that you have no claim to the inheritance. So,
I think it's best if you didn't bother, as you're unlikely to be taken seriously.
My calm response only angered her further, her voice growing louder.
What's with that attitude? You won't be able to act so smug for long. Just wait, I'm serious. I've been calling repeatedly since yesterday and finally got an appointment. The lawyer understood my determination. Surely, they'll be on my side and manage to get compensation from you. Just you wait.
With those words, reminiscent of a cartoon villain, she hung up. Why she called when she wouldn't listen to anything I said was beyond me. Perhaps she thought the mention of a lawyer would rattle me, enjoying the thought of my unease. Far from reflecting on not receiving a cent from her own brother, she seemed rather invigorated by her resolve to take what she believed was hers by any means necessary. Months passed without incident, and I managed to sort through Henry's study, which had been cluttered with various items. In parallel, I gradually packed up, leaving the house filled with memories of Henry and me. Henry had always wanted to retire to a quiet house in the suburbs, and I decided to fulfill that wish. Selling the house and land we lived in, I moved to an area where my sister and her husband lived, using the proceeds as a down payment. While it's regrettable we couldn't do it while Henry was alive, our dog Max, who had been with us for over 10 years, seemed to enjoy the new home. Letting go of the house meant I had far fewer belongings, but the thought of gradually making the new place comfortable brought me some hope for the future. Yet, the strange feeling of Henry's absence persisted, and the lack of furniture only seemed to amplify the loneliness. Especially when Max was sleeping, I found myself lost in thought more often than not, knowing it wasn't particularly healthy. As if interrupting my days, my smartphone suddenly blared one day. Half asleep and without checking, I answered during a TV show.
You're trying to ruin me, you curse.
It was Mary, screaming without any preamble, which instantly woke me up, though it was still unclear what she was ranting about this time. Sensing my silence, Mary didn't wait for a response before continuing.
It's your fault I'm getting divorced. The inheritance didn't come through because of you.
What? My surprised response was more out of formality. I had guessed the situation. Likely, Mary had told her husband she would receive a portion of Henry's estate, and their relationship soured when that didn't happen. A fragile marriage, to say the least. Blaming their issues on me was hardly fair.
Don't just stay quiet. Apologize. Your fault I can't live properly now. What am I supposed to do all alone?
Why don't you work?
You're still young in your 50s.
I retorted, causing Mary to fall silent. Whether irritated by the suggestion to work or caught off guard by the mention of her age, Mary needed to face reality eventually.
If you were living on your husband's salary, you shouldn't need the inheritance, right? Why did it lead to divorce?
My husband was after Henry's estate from the start. If Henry's inheritance wasn't coming through, then he had no further use for me. Despite having spent decades together, he claimed all was ruined because of me, a woman whose only assets he saw were her looks and money. He even said he wanted his time back, expressing his anger dramatically. Why should I be the one to get yelled at? My husband is a pitiful man with a low salary. I'm the one who wants my time back.
I had only met her husband at family meetings and then yearly at Christmas gatherings. Like Mary, he had a flashy impression, fond of brand-name clothes, accessories, and luxury cars. Given her mention of his low salary, it's likely they both had been eyeing Henry's wealth for some time, probably spending recklessly without any savings. Having lived lavishly on her husband's dime, Mary wasn't in a position to make claims. Marrying someone for their money and then squandering it was their own fault.
Even after consulting with a lawyer, I was turned away, told I had no claim to any inheritance. Everyone's making a fool of me. But you're the one I can't forgive. If it weren't for you, none of this would have happened.
Despite my warnings, she went to the lawyer, only to face the embarrassment I predicted.
Sally, you must have brainwashed my husband, right? He said he should have married someone like you. Why does he mention your name? You must have seduced him behind my back. That's the only explanation.
Why would you think that?
I don't even have his contact information. Lies. He's never praised a dowdy middle-aged woman before. You must have seduced him and had an affair. Confess, and if you give me the inheritance, I might forgive you.
This is nonsensical. Frustrated by her baseless accusations, I ended the call. The house was already being demolished, and the land was sold, so she couldn't come after me there. I hadn't given her my new address, making future encounters nearly impossible. Just to be sure, I blocked her number, determined to live peacefully. Half a year passed, and Max adapted well to our new life. My sister and I went out to eat once or twice a month, enjoying our days. My recent health checkup showed no issues, and the local shops provided convenience, leaving little to worry about except for that phone call a few months back. Mary, having divorced and depleted her savings, apparently sought welfare support at the social welfare office. During her visit, she was told that if she had relatives who could support her, she would not be eligible for assistance. The relatives who once praised Mary all refused to help with her living expenses, likely aware of her history of lavish spending. This led to her being isolated from her relatives. A caseworker then contacted me, but of course, I had no intention of helping. Considering how she and her ex-husband had approached us with financial motives and her disrespectful behavior even at the funeral, I felt no obligation to assist her now. Despite her accusations of me being money-minded, it was Mary who had succumbed to her own greed. I'm unaware of her current situation. Rumors suggest she quickly lost a job she had found due to conflicts, or that her neighbors noticed her ex-husband's absence, deducing their divorce and her subsequent move. No one seems to know where or how Mary is living now, and I've lost interest over time. Regaining my peace of mind, I cherished my time with Max more than ever. Max, who was always gentle like Henry, became even quieter with age, which worried me. My sister, a longtime dog lover who adored Max, surprisingly acquired a puppy one day. Excited, I visited my sister's family, greeted by a small Shiba Inu. Max, immediately taken by the puppy, watched it play joyously. I hoped the puppy would become a good friend for Max, smiling at the heartwarming scene. For the past 20 years since we got married, I thought I had been doing my best for my husband Paul and my mother-in-law, Dorothy. But then, out of the blue, Paul told me, "Starting next month, I'm going to live with Mom and Angela," announcing his plans to move in with Dorothy and his sister Angela. To make matters worse, Dorothy insulted me by saying,
"Parasites from outside the family should go back to their own homes."
That was the moment I finally woke up. I said,
"Understood. Then I'll leave."
With those words, I left the house the next day. However, when furniture and appliances started being moved out one after another, and Paul and his family heard that I had moved into a new condominium reputed to be worth $1 million, they were furious and came storming over. My name is Linda, and I'm 48 years old. I work in the accounting department of an air conditioning company. I lived with Paul, who is 2 years younger than me, and my mother-in-law Dorothy. We have no children. Paul and I first met when he joined the large real estate development company where I worked. Initially, I watched from the sidelines as he was doted on by female colleagues and older male employees, thinking he was just a man of these times. But for some reason, Paul said to me,
"Other accountants are kind of hard to approach, but you have a gentle aura, Linda."
He started assigning most of his paperwork to me. However, whether he was naturally scatterbrained or just carefree, I couldn't tell, but even when I pointed out errors in his documents or last-minute submissions, he would quickly apologize, saying, I'm really sorry." While I appreciated his willingness to apologize, the fact that he rarely corrected his behavior meant I often ended up working overtime because of him. It seemed clever, or rather sly, to keep up a cheerful facade, but each time I couldn't help feeling a bit troubled inside. Yet, whenever I appeared to struggle with the office supplies provided, he would bring me stationery he recommended, showing a thoughtfulness that always made me forgive him. In the end, I was being won over, just as he was, by taking care of him. Our relationship took a significant leap forward when I fell ill on the commuter train. Perhaps due to staying late at work during the busy season, I suddenly felt dizzy. Somehow, I managed to endure until I reached the station closest to our office, but then I slumped over on a bench on the platform, unable to move and fighting the nausea that was creeping up on me. Noticing my condition, Paul, despite my protests about getting his suit dirty, carried me to the station's medical room, following the station staff's instructions. Afterward, I took some medicine I had with me and lay down for a while. Eventually, the dizziness subsided, and I contacted the office again, only to be instructed by my boss to go home for the day. Moreover, Paul, who had stayed with me, was ordered to make sure I got home safely. Though I initially refused, I ended up letting him escort me home. The next day, I went to work as usual, apologized to my boss and colleagues, and then visited Paul in the sales department to explain the situation to his boss and apologize.
"I really inconvenienced you, and I want to do something to make it up to you.
How about this? Treat me to dinner this Friday. I'm short on cash right before payday." Paul's innocent request made me burst out laughing, and I agreed. While I intended it to be a one-time meal, he insisted. "Now that I've gotten my paycheck, let me treat you this time as a way of saying thanks." A reciprocation of thanks, and then another, somehow led to us being seen as a couple by those around us before we knew it. But when I rushed to deny the rumors, I found I was the only one in a panic. Paul, ever the laid-back one, said, "There's no need to deny it so desperately. I don't mind being thought of that way." Just like that, we came to be treated as a couple by everyone around us. And 2 years later, when I turned 28, "Maybe it's about time we got married. It would probably make everyone else feel more at ease," he suggested, and we got married. However, I had intended to keep working, but it was unexpected when Paul, who also worked at the same company, told me it was suffocating and asked me to quit.
"Considering your age, shouldn't you focus on having children first?"
Similarly to Dorothy, Paul also strongly suggested that I resign from my job. Moreover, while we had hoped to live in a condominium about 30 minutes away by train if we were both working, the conversation about living with Paul's parents came up. In fact, my father-in-law had passed away 10 years ago, and ever since my sister-in-law Angela, who is 4 years older than Paul, got married and moved out 3 years ago, Dorothy and Paul had been living alone together. Although I knew as the eldest son, Paul would eventually live with his parents, I wasn't keen on starting our marriage living with them. However, if Paul were to move out, Dorothy, being left alone, strongly opposed living separately. Convinced by the economic benefits of saving on rent, we started our married life living together. For a while after we got married, everything was peaceful. Dorothy was proud of Angela, who graduated from a prestigious university, landed a job at a major general trading company, and married an elite man from her workplace. Despite being the eldest son, Dorothy seemed to show little interest in Paul. Angela, who lived in a condominium about 30 minutes away by train from her parents' home, often begged Dorothy to help with household chores.
"Mom, please come help. I'm too busy every day to handle all the housework."
Dorothy, flattered by her beloved daughter's plea, didn't mind at all and regularly went to Angela's condominium, acting like a maid, cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry. However, there were times when Dorothy alone wasn't enough to handle everything, or when Angela took a vacation and they went out for afternoon tea at their favorite hotel, that I would also be called upon to help. But on regular days, Dorothy barely interfered with Paul and me, making our cohabitation more comfortable than I had anticipated. Given that, I thought helping out at Angela's place occasionally wasn't much of an issue. However, one day, Angela and Dorothy planned a one-night trip for rest and relaxation. During their absence, I was asked to tidy up Angela's house alone.
Angela said it would be bad to inconvenience her husband while we're gone, so please take care of the cleaning, laundry, and prepare meals in advance.
After sending Angela and Dorothy off and receiving the keys, I entered Angela's condominium and began doing the household chores as instructed. Cleaning, laundry, ironing, I went about my usual routine. But when it came time to store the prepared dishes in the fridge,
Make sure you chill his favorite brand of beer. He gets grumpy if it's not cold.
I remembered being told. Checking the fridge, I found not a single bottle of the crucial beer. Only the mineral water and beauty drinks Angela drinks every night. I should have checked before going shopping. I regretted, but it was too late. Reluctantly, I headed to the nearest supermarket, only to find they didn't stock the specific brand of beer. The beer Angela's husband preferred was a Belgian brand, not as readily available as domestic brands in any supermarket. Initially, I thought finding it would be easy if I just went to another store, but after visiting nearby supermarkets and drugstores that also sell food, I couldn't find the brand anywhere. Back then, map apps weren't as widespread, and I wasn't familiar with the area around Angela's condominium, so I had no idea where to find what stores. Despite rushing around in a panic, I couldn't find it, and time was running out. Eventually, I caught a taxi to a liquor store a bit further away and finally found the beer. By the time I returned to the condominium, it was nearly 5 p.m. I just wanted to put the beer in the fridge and head home. As I entered Angela's room, I saw her husband, Charles, standing in the living room.
Charles, you're home early.
As I said this, trying to tidy up the apron and the bag of food containers left on the sofa.
What's all this? I was told we hired someone to take care of the house.
He questioned. According to Charles, he had initially planned to invite his mother to live with them since they were both going to be working full-time.
My family is just like my wife's. My dad has passed away, and since I have no siblings, my mom is the only one I can rely on. So, I asked her to live with us in exchange for helping with household chores, he explained.
However, Angela retorted.
Then I want to invite my mom to live with us too. It's unfair and dishonest to favor only your mother.
I was scolded for that. As a result of the discussion, it was decided not to rely on either of our parents, but to hire someone for the household chores. And it was settled that we would share the costs for this. However, in reality, Dorothy and I were secretly called upon to do the housework. Upon learning the truth, Charles immediately contacted Angela's mobile phone. Perhaps sensing trouble, Angela and Dorothy rushed back from their trip, but it escalated into a big fight with Charles demanding explanations. Unable to leave and forced to listen in, it seemed Angela had been using the money Charles gave her for housekeeping on her own spa treatments and leisure activities with Dorothy. Dorothy managed to apologize on the spot, promising to be more careful in the future. But later on, it came to light that Dorothy and Angela had been gifting presents to and going out drinking with the handsome stylist at their favorite hair salon. Furious, especially after the previous incident, Charles refused to listen to Dorothy's persuasion, leading to a divorce. Since Angela and her husband had only been married for about 5 years and lived in a rental condominium, there was no dispute over assets, and they divorced without any compensation. It seems she couldn't bear the rumors at the workplace since they worked at the same company. Angela, having been scouted, resigned and moved to another company simultaneously with her divorce. However, it seems she struggled to build her career as hoped in the new environment. Angela, frustrated, began to lash out at me along with Dorothy.
It's all your fault this happened. If only you had handled things better, none of this would have occurred. You're the one who ruined my life.
That's how they started blaming me. Moreover, at a time when I was distressed over not being able to have children, Dorothy mocked me, saying,
I wanted to see my grandchildren, but I guess it's for the best. A grandchild born from such a defective woman wouldn't have been lovable anyway.
She said that bluntly. The sheer unfairness made me burst into tears. But what shocked me more was when Paul saw me crying and disdainfully said,
If you're going to cry and regret your sins now, why couldn't you have just done as they said? It's me who wants to cry, being caught up in your mistakes.
Hearing that made me feel so devastated, my legs almost gave way. Because it meant Paul seriously thought I was to blame, despite knowing everything. In other words, I had no allies in this house. Realizing this, I immediately thought of divorce, but being a housewife with no job made it not so simple to just say I wanted a divorce. I could go back to my parents' house, but moving back unemployed to a house where my brother and his wife lived nearby would just make me feel small. And it would likely be hard to find a job in the countryside that would allow me to live on my own. So, I decided to focus first on establishing a financial foundation, swallowing my pride. I found a part-time job in accounting, secretly relying on connections from my previous job. I got permission by tearfully telling Dorothy and Paul.
It pains me to just be a housewife when we're struggling to have children, so I want to at least work a part-time job to help with the household finances.
And I started working the next month. Of course, neglecting housework could lead to snide comments and possibly demands to quit my job. That's why I pushed myself hard, even when tired or feeling unwell. I made no compromises at work, seizing any chance to improve and continuing to strive. As a result, I was promoted to a full-time position in the second year of my part-time job. 5 years later, I was invited by a former boss to join the current air conditioning company and have continued to work hard. But recently, as we approached our 20th wedding anniversary, after dinner, as I was doing the dishes, Paul came and said,
Come to the living room, I have something to tell you.
It was unusual for him to seek me out as he usually spent his time happily with Dorothy, indifferent to whatever I was doing in the house. With that thought, I went to the living room, and before I could even sit down,
This has already been decided.
Paul began.
Starting next month, I'm going to live with Mom and Angela,
he declared. Dumbfounded, Dorothy added,
Angela's been overworked at her new job, got sick, and needs to recuperate at home. It's best for her to relax here, and if that's the case, it's better without an extra mouth to feed, right?
Then, coming over to my side on purpose, she said,
Parasites from outside the family should go back to their own homes,
making a shooing gesture at me. They watched my reaction with a malicious smile, but inside, I smiled at the thought of being freed from this hassle. Then I slowly smiled at them and said,
I understand. I'll leave tomorrow afternoon.
As I walked to my room, I glanced at their faces, as dumbfounded as I had been a moment ago. The next morning, after seeing Paul off to work, I waited for the second-hand goods buyer I had contacted the night before. Unaware, Dorothy was startled by the arrival of the unfamiliar men, but we started the work without minding her. From the kitchen, the refrigerator, oven range, dishwasher, Dorothy's favorite soda maker, and dining set were all taken. Of course, I didn't forget the IH cooking heater. Next in the living room, the TV, air conditioner, the diligently working robot vacuum, and AI speaker. The off-season hot carpet and sofa set were also listed. Then, the fully automatic washing machine, Paul's room's computer desk, and bookshelf. In addition, the air conditioner, bed, and dresser in Dorothy and Paul's rooms were quickly appraised. As the dealer started making a call, Dorothy, seemingly coming to her senses, rushed over furiously.
Hey! What are you starting here? Entering people's bedrooms!
She shrieked at me, to which I replied with a smile.
Since I'm just a parasite from outside the family, I thought I should at least take care of my own belongings before making my exit.
Just then, additional personnel called by the dealer arrived. After that, the furniture and appliances listed were swiftly moved out of my husband's family home. Overwhelmed by the efficient and purposeful movement, Dorothy could only pace restlessly around. Then, as a final touch, after removing all the room lights, the dealer quickly left. What remained were Paul's computer and the bedding for his bed placed directly on the floor, and Dorothy's cosmetics left on the floor, visible to the eye. Then, Dorothy exclaimed again.
Wait a minute! Do you think you can get away with doing something like this?
To which I simply responded, I'll be consulting a lawyer for the rest. With that, I left my husband's family home, pulling along a suitcase I had packed the night before. A week later, after receiving a call from the lawyer I had hired, Paul, Dorothy, and Keiko rushed to the lawyer's office on the same day. When I arrived late,
You call us here and then show up late. What a disgraceful woman!
Immediate angry shouts were thrown at me. But then, Mr. Smith, the lawyer, clarified.
We did not summon you here. It was you who came unannounced right after we informed you that I would be handling future negotiations.
Hearing this, the normally confrontational Paul immediately quieted down. Then, as if seeking vengeance for her son, Dorothy was ready to fight.
Now that we're face to face, let's talk. After leaving like a thief, there's no way you can just come back. But if you're willing to apologize and show remorse, that's a different story.
She said in one breath, glaring at me. Angela and Paul were nodding vigorously beside her, probably thinking I would jump at the chance to discuss this topic. How naive. At my signal, the lawyer smoothly began.
Of course, she has no intention of returning. The discussion is about signing the divorce papers, property division, and compensation.
Stunned by these words, the three of them exclaimed,
We're not getting a divorce. Property division and compensation. How audacious! How dare you!
All at once, creating a racket. When things got out of control, the lawyer's coughing brought some quiet, and I calmly stated,
Divorce is a settled matter. If you do not agree, we are prepared to proceed with mediation or court.
They tried to raise their voices again, but another cough from the lawyer made them quiet down. After some whispered discussions among themselves, they surprisingly quickly signed the divorce papers I presented. However, their attitude changed again when it came to property division and compensation.
How audacious to talk about property division. You were just a part-timer, practically a parasite to Paul. To think we made such a failure our son's wife, we should be the ones receiving compensation. We won't pay a penny.
They began to berate again. Then, I presented the recent 5 years household accounts and the bank account statements I used for managing living expenses. Initially, Paul and Dorothy didn't understand, but as the lawyer explained with the documents, their complexions darkened. Because for about the last 5 years, I had been paying approximately $3,200 a month for living expenses, practically covering everything.
That's ridiculous. I've been contributing $1,500 a month to our household.
Paul protested, but against the $1,500 Paul deposited, the revolving credit payments for Paul and Dorothy's cards were nearly the same amount. Effectively, even if his salary was deposited, it just went out from one hand to the other. Instead, the $3,200 from my salary account covered the remodeling loan, Paul and Dorothy's car loan, groceries, and all the loans for furniture and appliances.
In the past 5 years, since Linda became the head of the accounting department at her current company, almost all of her income went into the household. That amounts to about $190,000 in total. Despite such contribution, it's quite something to be called a parasite, the lawyer stated.
The three were wide-eyed, flipping through the documents, but what the lawyer stated was an undeniable fact. Realizing they were at a disadvantage, Dorothy suddenly said,
"Hey, Linda. We were once husband and wife, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, and sisters-in-law, weren't we? Let's stop fighting and walk our separate paths peacefully."
She tried to appeal to me with a conciliatory tone. I responded, "Yes, that's right.
And I also let my temper get the best of me the other day and sold off all the furniture and appliances. Let's both act like adults and part ways peacefully."
With that, I requested the lawyer to draft a divorce agreement. We both agreed to renounce our rights to property division and compensation in the divorce agreement. After making it official with a notary public, Paul and I shook hands, ending our 20-year marriage. But the story didn't end there. After completing the procedures, Paul, Dorothy, and I went our separate ways. 2 months later, I began receiving numerous messages from them on the only social media account I hadn't blocked. Initially, I ignored them, but the constant barrage of messages, day and night, became too annoying. Hearing they had even shown up at the lawyer's office demanding to see me, I decided to meet them one last time to set things straight. This time, I arrived a bit earlier than the agreed time, but Paul and the others were already there. Looking restless and somewhat shabbier than before. As soon as they saw me, Paul barked,
"You bought a room in that new condominium in front of the station, didn't you?"
I had chosen a property not affiliated with Paul's company, but they must have found out somehow. Then Dorothy joined in, yelling,
"Where did you hide that money? If it's from during our marriage, it should be shared property, right? Coward!"
Their noise was unbearable, so I reminded them that we had both agreed to waive our rights to property division. They seemed to have conveniently forgotten anything unfavorable to them. Paul and my mother-in-law turned pale, but quickly retorted,
"That's the same as being tricked. The one who hid it is to blame."
The lawyer then coolly stated,
The funds for Linda's condominium purchase came from the sale proceeds of stock options she had received upon joining her current company. This does not fall under marital assets. If you still claim rights, we'll see you in court.
Paul fell silent at that. But Dorothy went even further.
"Oh, is that so? If that's your attitude, we'll take this to court or whatever it takes."
Saying this, she huffed angrily. I then countered,
"In that case, I'll also file for damages." The psychological damage wasn't minor, considering you were so openly looking for a new partner even before our divorce was finalized.
I laughed as I said this, making Dorothy's face go pale. Next to her, Angela, who had been sitting dazed, also turned white when I added,
"Of course, Angela, I'll be claiming damages for the emotional distress you've caused me. I've kept all the evidence of the verbal abuse and harassment you've inflicted on me after your divorce from Charles."
I laid out a voice recorder, USB drives, and printed messages as proof. Lastly, I said,
"By the way, Angela, you know Mary, right? Actually, she's the daughter of my direct superior.
As I looked straight into Angela's eyes with a smile, her complexion turned even paler. I had already discussed and consulted my current employer to some extent about the situation to prevent any disruption in my work. In fact, that supervisor has a daughter named Mary. I've met her a few times at company BBQs and other events, a cheerful and wonderful woman. However, right after graduating from university and joining a company, Mary faced terrible harassment from her boss and is currently on leave due to mental health issues. The person who harassed her was Angela. Mary's parents divorced when she was young, and since then, she has been living with her father. Because Mary didn't have any close female figures, I was asked to take her out for meals and shopping to help her get a change of scenery, to which I happily agreed. Our conversation started with trivial matters, and I mostly listened to Mary, but I was shocked when Angela's name came up. At the same time, I learned that Angela's so-called medical leave was a complete lie. She was actually under a home stay order because her treatment of Mary had become a problem at work. This prompted me to start preparing for a divorce as quickly as possible. If Angela were to be demoted or fired, she would undoubtedly end up moving into my husband's family home. That would put me in an even more difficult financial and mental position. I was wondering how to initiate a divorce to my advantage when I was conveniently kicked out by them. I made a show of selling all the furniture and appliances. I pretended to make a sacrifice by giving up claims to property division and compensation. The reason I made a notarized document was because of the new share options. After all, due to Paul and Dorothy, I had hardly any savings, so if we had gone through a strict property division, I would have ended up paying out more. There's no guarantee of getting compensation if there's no money to pay it, even if I won the case. That's why it was necessary to make them give up their claim to property division by bringing up the issue of living expenses and making them feel indebted. Paul, Dorothy, and Angela finally understood everything. The foolish trio, who thought they could go back to their usual lives without the parasite me, left with their shoulders slumped. Their downfall afterwards was severe. Dorothy, just as I had pointed out, not only spread the word that she was going to decisively break up her son with his part-time job-capable wife and me, but also said,
"So, if you know any nice girls, I'd love for you to introduce them to my son."
She even went as far as to demand dinner parties to introduce her son to women. Of course, among those approached, people of standing talked behind Dorothy's back, saying it was absurd to look for a new partner for her son before even finalizing the divorce with his current wife. Moreover, setting such conditions, she must be greatly overestimating what her son is worth. They were said to have laughed at this. And the conditions Dorothy deemed suitable for Paul's wife were astonishing.
First off, she should be in her early 20s. Anyone older would be too influenced by society's nonsense about equality in marriage, right?
She was reported to have said. This alone was shocking enough, but Dorothy didn't stop there.
Of course, we'll cut ties with the wife's family, but before that, they should hand over their inheritance up front. We need someone with a certain level of assets and financial power. And could we get a medical checkup to ensure she's capable of having children?
She went as far as to say this, earning herself contempt from listeners. Unaware of the cold stares around her, she continued.
Of course, being tall, stylish, and beautiful is a given. Thank you in advance.
Naturally, no marriage proposals came Dorothy's way, and in her desperation, she apparently sent a flurry of urgent calls and messages. However, she was either turned down because no one met her conditions or simply ignored. Soon, the rumors of my divorce spread among friends, acquaintances, and neighbors, making them a subject of ridicule. Perhaps unable to bear the disdainful looks due to their previously arrogant behavior, they ended up confining themselves within their home, not going out anymore. Recently, there have been rumors about hearing screams, shouts, and the sound of breaking dishes coming from their house, supposedly from Dorothy. Previously, Dorothy would vent her frustrations on me or indulge in spending to relieve stress. Now, without me as her punching bag and unable to shop or take short trips for stress relief, she might be wreaking havoc at home. Meanwhile, Paul had left all financial matters to me since our marriage. He seemed not to understand the basics of budgeting, and even after the lawyer explained it clearly, he remained overconfident, thinking,
If she could manage the living expenses, then I can easily do it too if I put my mind to it.
That appears to have been his careless assumption. However, Dorothy and Angela, who were supposed to take over the household chores, abandoned everything, considering it too much of a hassle. Meals became all delivery or takeout, and cleaning and laundry were left to a housekeeping service, among other miscellaneous tasks, leading to a financial breakdown in just 2 months. The credit card Dorothy used for living expenses was quickly revoked, and their meals turned to just toast and coffee for breakfast, instant noodles for lunch, and mainly takeout for dinner. Laundry was done all at once when they ran out of clothes. Living a life of only cleaning visible areas, they ended up leading a nutritionally unbalanced and unsanitary lifestyle. Paul, who was once praised for looking younger than his age, gained unhealthy weight, his skin became rough, his hair greasy, and his once handsome appearance vanished. Not fitting the image of a salesperson, he received a flood of complaints from clients. This led to him being relegated to back-end work with a reduced salary. Paul reached out to the lawyer, saying,
I've come to my senses. I was deceived by Mom and Angela. I want to cut ties with them and start over.
Through phone calls and emails. But as prearranged.
I've been instructed not to engage with you under any circumstances,
was the firm response. They warned that if they attempted to approach my workplace or new home, the police would be contacted immediately. Thankfully, that put an end to any further contact. As for Mary, another main character in this saga, she was furious when I shared the entire story with her.
What's that supposed to mean? I thought she might have learned something from what happened with me, but she's blaming her divorce on you and resorting to such harassment. She's always been that kind of person, hasn't she?
She raged. After contacting the company where she was on leave, intending to resign, she was called in and questioned about her reasons. Mary explained that while the issue was personal and not directly related to her work, she disclosed everything about the situation to HR and administration. After ensuring that those present were shocked by the story, she stated,
There must have been faults on my part in the issue with me as well. I was hoping we could work together for the company if you sincerely reflected on it. But I cannot see that happening,
she asserted firmly. While presenting her resignation letter, she said,
Working under her again would be a mental health hazard for me.
Mary then transferred to a competitor that allowed her to work remotely until her health fully recovered. At her former department, the news of Mary's sudden resignation, who was supposed to be on leave, shocked everyone. Rumors spread that the harassment from Angela continued outside the company, leading to an uncontrollable situation. Some colleagues, who admired Mary, a leader among the younger staff, started considering changing jobs, prompting the higher-ups to convene urgent discussions. As a result, Angela was transferred to a subsidiary in another state after her home stay period ended. Despite Angela's resistance, claiming the transfer was an unfair treatment, the threat of dismissal forced her to reluctantly accept the assignment. However, at the new company, rumors had already spread, leaving her completely isolated, with no one to socialize with and receiving only the bare minimum of communication needed for work. Crying to Paul and Dorothy,
I want to quit. I want to come back.
she was met with,
"We don't need an unemployed troublemaker. Whose fault do you think this is?"
"That's right. You are the real disaster and parasite." She was harshly rebuked by the two. Now, in a corner of the subsidiary where no one approaches her, she continues to work, a shadow of her former self. As for me, after the divorce from Paul was finalized and this whole ordeal ended, encouraged by Mary, I remarried my boss after about half a year of living together. To be honest, considering my 20-year marriage with Paul, I wasn't inclined towards remarrying, but Mary said something along the lines of,
"It might sound odd coming from his daughter, but marriage can be good depending on the partner. I think my dad, despite his age, is quite a catch."
Mary encouraged me, seeing my hesitation. Indeed, in less than a year, I've laughed more than during the entire 20 years with Paul. Having a partner to share a life where I can be myself has truly brought happiness. Sometimes, I think if I had made this decision sooner. I do feel a bit of regret, but dwelling on the past and wasting the remaining time seems far more wasteful. I plan to cherish the peaceful life ahead with my new husband and daughter.